To understand this, you have to go back to what young brother here referred to as the house Negro and the field Negro. Back during slavery, there was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food, what he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro said, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, what's the matter, boss? We sick. We sick. He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, that house Negro would look at you and say, man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was that house Negro. In those days, he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call him today, because we still got some house niggers running around here. This modern house Negro loves his master. He wants to live near him. He'll pay 3 times as much as the house is worth just to live near his master. And then brag about, I'm the only Negro out here. I'm the only one on my job. I'm the only one in this school. You're nothing but a house Negro. The field Negro was beaten from morning till night. He lived in a shack, in a hut. He wore cast-off clothes. And he hated his master. I say he hated his master. He was intelligent. That house Negro loved his master. But that field Negro, remember, they were in the majority. And they hated the master. When the house caught on fire, he didn't try and put it out. That field Negro prayed for a wind, for a breeze. When the master got sick, the field Negro prayed that he died. If someone come to the field Negro and said, let's separate, let's run, he didn't say, where are we going? He said, any place is better than here. You got field Negroes in America today. I'm a field Negro. The masses are the field Negroes. When they see this man's house on fire, you don't hear these little Negroes talking about our government is in trouble. They say the government is in trouble. Imagine a Negro, our government. I even heard one say our astronauts. They won't even let him near the plant. And our astronauts. Our Navy, that's a Negro that's out of his mind. That's a Negro that's out of his mind.
The Klan in Oregon didn't just have numbers, it reached into the highest echelons of power.
We had a governor who was Klan affiliated.
It's a political machine, it's a national purity crusade. They supported immigration restriction laws. It was basically a money-making organization.
Most communities of any size had a Klan. In Oregon, the main focus of the Ku Klux Klan was fear of Catholics. There were hardly any African Americans in Oregon at the time.
But what the Klan represented was a frightening threat for people of color, all colors, blacks especially.
It's something that Oregon has really tried to forget, and yet we can't begin to understand this place that we live without this information.
According to a 1924 Klan brochure, it was an organization that stood for white supremacy, the Protestant faith, and patriotic ideals. Through the 1920s, it's believed there were between 15 to 50,000 Klan members in Oregon. Indiana and Texas claim to have 5 times that number. No one really knows. There are no complete records, and membership numbers were often exaggerated. Other than a handful of images, most of that history has been hidden away. But the Oregon Historical Society holds some of the robes and other materials used by the KKK, providing tangible evidence of the Klan's presence here.
Not discussing the KKK and their role in that period of history in Oregon would be remiss of us. And I think that it is really important because there will always be reasons to look to the past to do better. There will always be ongoing scholarship and research, and that's one of the reasons that OHS exists.
We tend to think of the KKK as sort of this rogue group of guys who intimidate people and all that, and that was true. But the KKK in Oregon wove its way into the political arena. We had a governor who was Klan affiliated.
That's not just a local movement here in Oregon. It's a national movement. And it's created because of national events. You can see certain patterns of behavior and certain kind of dynamics that were important and powerful parts of the 1920s that are occurring in America today.
The Klan would fasten on whatever seemed to be most resented or feared in any particular area, and then focused on those. In Oregon, the main focus of the Ku Klux Klan was fear of Catholics. There were hardly any African Americans in Oregon at the time.
The black population in Oregon has never really been very large. In fact, that from 1844, with the first the provisional government and then the territorial government, there have been black exclusion laws on the books, which essentially said you could not be black in Oregon, or if you were here, you couldn't stay.
You couldn't build a movement against the black population that was so small and non-threatening in Oregon. But Catholics could be built into a threatening presence here that you could build a movement against.
In 1920, Oregon had a population of almost 800,000. 97% of residents were white. Most were Protestant. For a time, the state would become a breeding ground for Klan activities.
People just do not associate Oregon with that. They like to think that those kinds of things happen in the South.
The Oregon Remembrance Project is setting out to create a culture of belonging in some parts of southern Oregon cities of a history of racial exclusion. Thank you for joining us for Newswatch 12 at 6. I'm Brinkley Hill. This week, they're coming to Ashland to give it a new identity as a sunrise community. Newswatch 12's Leave column joins us live in studio. Leave, how is this project taking former sundown towns and turning them into sunrise communities?
Well, Brinkley, today I talked with Taylor Stewart, the director of the Oregon Remembrance Project. He says that once you unpack a community's past struggles, it's important to take concrete steps to create a positive future, and they're hoping to do that in Ashland. On Monday, the Oregon Remembrance Project is launching its newest effort, turning Ashland into a sunrise community by setting out to repair and reconcile the city's past as a sundown town. This would make Ashland the second sunrise community in Oregon after Grants Pass.
These stories of historical injustice often make us feel powerless, and so what I try to do is give people the belief that, in fact, we do have power over the endings to these stories.
Many cities in southern Oregon were sundown towns, with a culture of fear and violence for people of color. Executive Director Taylor Stewart is aiming to show the real people who have been impacted by Ashland's history.
Patricia Norman. She was the first black company member of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. She was unable to rent a room from anybody because she was African American, and so she had to stay at the local college, and other theater members would escort her to and from the theater and around town because of the threat of violence and discrimination against African Americans.
The Sunrise Project launch is a joint effort with the Remembrance Project and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. They're hoping to open up the conversation about the future by learning from the past.
We're wanting to use this history not for the sake of shame or guilt, but to use it as really a starting place and a learning opportunity for the ways with which we can improve as a community.
The launch event for the Sunrise Project in Ashland is taking place tomorrow night from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at Carpenter Hall. The event is free, and you can register by going to ashlandtogether.org. That link is also on our website, kdrv.com. Live in studio, Leave Column, Newswatch 12.
The Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information for non-white people, information on the global system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, April 24, 2026. So I have been told. This is our second installment. Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Now, importantly, last week we read the preface for the 10th anniversary edition. I said then, I will repeat, we're not going to read that version. We are now going backwards to read the original, hot off the presses 2010 version without all the revisions and whatever else she said she changed around for the new print. We will be picking up, so we're reading the preface. We read the 10th anniversary preface last week. We're going to read the original preface, so that's what we're starting at this week for the 2010 version, so there's no confusion. Quickly, we heard Minister Malcolm X at the beginning. We discussing our pronoun usage. And then we heard the history, a tad bit, of the KKK in the state of Oregon, where they explicitly forbid black people to live, exist in the state, and Ashland, Oregon specifically, a so-called sundown town, racially restricted region. They said that it would be remiss of us to erase or not acknowledge all of this, that the state of Oregon, meaning white people, they tried to forget all of this history. Why is all of this important for us as we get back to Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow? This is from a 2010 review of her book, and there were many, like many. It reads, Early Life. Michelle L. Alexander was born on October 7, 1967, and initially raised in Stell, Illinois, a small planned community where her parents' interracial marriage was not looked down upon. Her mother, Sandra, was white, and her father, John Alexander, was black. Alexander witnessed their struggles with discrimination, even from other family members. My grandfather was extremely hostile to my mother marrying my father, a negro. She told Arnie Cooper for Sun magazine in February 2011, noting that her mother was disowned and her family's church excommunicated her. Religion of white supremacy. Racial discrimination continued to shape Alexander's childhood. When she was 8 years old, her father was transferred to San Francisco, California, so the family moved to the West Coast. Alexander's father was a successful salesperson for IBM, but was continually overlooked for promotions, so he eventually left the company. Alexander attended a mix of private and public schools where she encountered a variety of people from different ethnic and economic backgrounds. She ended up attending 3 different high schools because her parents' financial troubles caused the family to move around a lot. Despite the challenges of being evicted and frequently moving, Alexander performed well in school during her senior year of high school in Ashland, Oregon. Now, the important thing about Ashland, Oregon is that the negro population there is 0.1%. 0.1%. I have no idea how you exist in a racially restricted region and conclude based on evidence that, hey, we're colorblind. Don't nobody pay attention to no okay. Now, she talks about her black father's experience, not just with her racist white family, but with the racist whites in Ashland. 0.1, and imagine being a black male in Ashland, 0.1% Negro land, and you got a white wife and mulatto children. That's context for your colorblind, and that's context for your we. Now, do you think all that should have been, or at least some of that should have been in the book, especially based on what we're about to hear right now? Ooh, one of the worst books ever, and Michelle Alexander isn't even honest. That's what makes this book most repulsive, the dishonesty. We will get to it. New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, Katherine Massey Book Club, Part 1.
For Nicole, Jonathan, and Corinne. It is often said, it takes a village to raise a child. In my case, it has taken a village to write this book. I gave birth to 3 children in 4 years, and in the middle of this burst of joyous activity in our home, I decided to write this book. It was written while feeding babies and during nap times. It was written at odd hours and often when I, and everyone else in the household, had little sleep. Quitting the endeavor was tempting, as writing the book proved far more challenging than I expected. But just when I felt it was too much or too hard, someone I loved would surprise me with generosity and unconditional support, and just when I started to believe the book was not worth the effort, I would receive, out of the blue, a letter from someone behind bars who would remind me of all the reasons that I could not possibly quit, and how fortunate I was to be sitting in the comfort of my home or my office, rather than in a prison cell. My colleagues and publisher supported this effort, too, in ways that far exceeded the call of duty. I want to begin, then, by acknowledging those people who made sure I did not give up, the people who made sure this important story got told. First on this list is Nancy Rogers, who was Dean of the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State University until 2008. Nancy exemplifies outstanding leadership. I will always remember her steadfast encouragement, support, and flexibility, as I labored to juggle my commitments to work and family. Thank you, Nancy, for your faith in me. In this regard, I also want to thank John Powell, director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity. He immediately understood what I hoped to accomplish with this book and provided critical institutional support. My husband, Carter Stewart, has been my rock. Without ever once uttering a word of complaint, he has read and reread drafts and rearranged his schedule countless times to care for our children, so that I could make progress with my writing. As a federal prosecutor, he does not share my views about the criminal justice system, but his different worldview has not, even for a moment, compromised his ability to support me, lovingly, at every turn in my efforts to share my truth. I made the best decision of my life when I married him. My mother and sister, too, have been blessings in my life. Determined to ensure that I actually finished this book, they have exhausted themselves chasing after the little people in my home, who are bundles of joy, and more than a little tiring. Their love and good humor have been food for my soul. Special thanks is also owed Nicole Hanft, whose loving kindness and caring for our children will forever be appreciated. I deeply regret that I may never be able to thank, in person, Timothy Demetrius Johnson, Tawan Childs, Jacob McNary, Timothy Anderson, and Larry Brown Austin, who are currently incarcerated. Their kind letters and expressions of gratitude for my work motivated me more than they could possibly know, reminding me that I could not rest until this book was done. I am also grateful for the support of the Open Society Institute of the Soros Foundation, as well as for the generosity of the many people who have reviewed and commented on portions of the manuscript or contributed to it in some way, including Sharon Davies, Andrew Grant Thomas, Evan Mobley, Mark Maurer, Elena Linson, Johanna Wu, Steve Menendian, Hiram Jose Arizario Sorio, Ruth Peterson, Hassan Jeffries, Shauna Marshall, and Tobias Wolfe. My dear friend Maya Harris is owed special thanks for reading multiple drafts of various chapters, never tiring of the revision process. Lucky for me, my sister, Leslie Alexander, is an African American history scholar, so I benefited from her knowledge and critical perspective regarding our nation's racial history. Any errors in fact or judgment are entirely my own, of course. I also want to express my appreciation to my outstanding editor and publisher, Diane Wachtel of the New Press, who believed in this book before I had even written a word, and waited very patiently for the final word to be written. A number of my former students have made important contributions to this book, including Galando Moreno, Monica Ramirez, Stephanie Beckstrom, Lacey Sales, Yolanda Miller, Rashida Edmondson, Tanisha Wilburn, Ryan King, Allison Lammers, Danny Goldman, Stephen Kane, Anu Menon, and Lenza McElrath. Many of them worked without pay, simply wanting to contribute to this effort in some way. I cannot close without acknowledging the invaluable gifts I received from my parents, who ultimately made this book possible by raising me. I inherited determination from my mother, who astounds me with her ability to overcome extraordinary obstacles and meet each day with fresh optimism. I owe my vision for social justice to my father, who was a dreamer and never ceased to challenge me to probe deeper, for greater truth. I wish he were still alive to see this book, though I suspect he knows something of it still. This book is for you, too, Dad. May you rest in peace. Preface. This book is not for everyone. I have a specific audience in mind, people who care deeply about racial justice but who, for any number of reasons, do not yet appreciate the magnitude of the crisis faced by communities of color as a result of mass incarceration. In other words, I am writing this book for people like me, the person I was 10 years ago. I am also writing it for another audience, those who have been struggling to persuade their friends, neighbors, relatives, teachers, coworkers, or political representatives that something is eerily familiar about the way our criminal justice system operates, something that looks and feels a lot like an era we supposedly left behind, but have lacked the facts and data to back up their claims. It is my hope and prayer that this book empowers you and allows you to speak your truth with greater conviction, credibility, and courage. Last, but definitely not least, I am writing this book for all those trapped within America's latest caste system. You may be locked up or locked out of mainstream society, but you are not forgotten. Introduction. Jarvius Cotton cannot vote. Like his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather, he has been denied the right to participate in our electoral democracy. Cotton's family tree tells the story of several generations of black men who were born in the United States but who were denied the most basic freedom that democracy promises, the freedom to vote for those who will make the rules and laws that govern one's life. Cotton's great-great-grandfather could not vote as a slave. His great-grandfather was beaten to death by the Ku Klux Klan for attempting to vote. His grandfather was prevented from voting by Klan intimidation. His father was barred from voting by poll taxes and literacy tests. Today, Jarvius Cotton cannot vote because he, like many black men in the United States, has been labeled a felon and is currently on parole. Cotton's story illustrates, in many respects, the old adage, the more things change, the more they remain the same. In each generation, new tactics have been used for achieving the same goals shared by the Founding Fathers. Denying African American citizenship was deemed essential to the formation of the original Union. Hundreds of years later, America is still not an egalitarian democracy. The arguments and rationalizations that have been trotted out in support of racial exclusion and discrimination in its various forms have changed and evolved, but the outcome has remained largely the same. An extraordinary percentage of black men in the United States are legally barred from voting today, just as they have been throughout most of American history. They are also subject to legalized discrimination in employment, housing, education, public benefits, and jury service, just as their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents once were. What has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than with the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race, explicitly, as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt. So we don't. Rather than rely on race, we use our criminal justice system to label people of color criminals and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind. Today it is perfectly legal to discriminate against criminals in nearly all the ways that it was once legal to discriminate against African Americans. Once you're labeled a felon, the old forms of discrimination, employment discrimination, housing discrimination, denial of the right to vote, denial of educational opportunity, denial of food stamps and other public benefits, and exclusion from jury service, are suddenly legal. As a criminal, you have scarcely more rights, and arguably less respect, than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. We have not ended racial caste in America, we have merely redesigned it. I reached the conclusions presented in this book reluctantly. 10 years ago, I would have argued strenuously against the central claim made here, namely, that something akin to a racial caste system currently exists in the United States. Indeed, if Barack Obama had been elected president back then, I would have argued that his election marked the nation's triumph over racial caste, the final nail in the coffin of Jim Crow. My elation would have been tempered by the distance yet to be traveled to reach the promised land of racial justice in America, but my conviction that nothing remotely similar to Jim Crow exists in this country would have been steadfast. Today my elation over Obama's election is tempered by a far more sobering awareness. As an African American woman, with 3 young children who will never know a world in which a black man could not be president of the United States, I was beyond thrilled on election night. Yet when I walked out of the election night party, full of hope and enthusiasm, I was immediately reminded of the harsh realities of the new Jim Crow. A black man was on his knees in the gutter, hands cuffed behind his back, as several police officers stood around him talking, joking, and ignoring his human existence. People poured out of the building, many stared for a moment at the black man cowering in the street, and then averted their gaze. What did the election of Barack Obama mean for him? Like many civil rights lawyers, I was inspired to attend law school by the civil rights victories of the 1950s and 1960s. Even in the face of growing social and political opposition to remedial policies such as affirmative action, I clung to the notion that the evils of Jim Crow are behind us and that, while we have a long way to go to fulfill the dream of an egalitarian, multiracial democracy, we have made real progress and are now struggling to hold on to the gains of the past. I thought my job as a civil rights lawyer was to join with the allies of racial progress to resist attacks on affirmative action and to eliminate the vestiges of Jim Crow segregation, including our still separate and unequal system of education. I understood the problems plaguing poor communities of color, including problems associated with crime and rising incarceration rates, to be a function of poverty and lack of access to quality education, the continuing legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. Never did I seriously consider the possibility that a new racial caste system was operating in this country. The new system had been developed and implemented swiftly, and it was largely invisible, even to people, like me, who spent most of their waking hours fighting for justice. I first encountered the idea of a new racial caste system more than a decade ago, when a bright orange poster caught my eye. I was rushing to catch the bus, and I noticed a sign stapled to a telephone pole that screamed in large bold print, "The drug war is the new Jim Crow." I paused for a moment and skimmed the text of the flyer. Some radical group was holding a community meeting about police brutality, the new 3 strikes law in California, and the expansion of America's prison system. The meeting was being held at a small community church a few blocks away. It had seating capacity for no more than 50 people. I sighed, and muttered to myself something like, "Yeah, the criminal justice system is racist in many ways, but it really doesn't help to make such an absurd comparison. People will just think you're crazy." I then crossed the street and hopped on the bus. I was headed to my new job, director of the Racial Justice Project of the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, in Northern California. When I began my work at the ACLU, I assumed that the criminal justice system had problems of racial bias, much in the same way that all major institutions in our society are plagued with problems associated with conscious and unconscious bias. As a lawyer who had litigated numerous class action employment discrimination cases, I understood well the many ways in which racial stereotyping can permeate subjective decision-making processes at all levels of an organization, with devastating consequences. I was familiar with the challenges associated with reforming institutions in which racial stratification is thought to be normal, the natural consequence of differences in education, culture, motivation, and, some still believe, innate ability. While at the ACLU, I shifted my focus from employment discrimination to criminal justice reform and dedicated myself to the task of working with others to identify and eliminate racial bias whenever and wherever it reared its ugly head. By the time I left the ACLU, I had come to suspect that I was wrong about the criminal justice system. It was not just another institution infected with racial bias but rather a different beast entirely. The activists who posted the sign on the telephone pole were not crazy, nor were the smattering of lawyers and advocates around the country who were beginning to connect the dots between our current system of mass incarceration and earlier forms of social control. Quite belatedly, I came to see that mass incarceration in the United States had, in fact, emerged as a stunningly comprehensive and well-disguised system of racialized social control that functions in a manner strikingly similar to Jim Crow. In my experience, people who have been incarcerated rarely have difficulty identifying the parallels between these systems of social control. Once they are released, they are often denied the right to vote, excluded from juries, and relegated to a racially segregated and subordinated existence. Through a web of laws, regulations, and informal rules, all of which are powerfully reinforced by social stigma, they are confined to the margins of mainstream society and denied access to the mainstream economy. They are legally denied the ability to obtain employment, housing, and public benefits, much as African Americans were once forced into a segregated, second-class citizenship in the Jim Crow era. Those of us who have viewed that world from a comfortable distance, yet sympathize with the plight of the so-called underclass, tend to interpret the experience of those caught up in the criminal justice system primarily through the lens of popularized social science, attributing the staggering increase in incarceration rates in communities of color to the predictable, though unfortunate, consequences of poverty, racial segregation, unequal educational opportunities, and the presumed realities of the drug market, including the mistaken belief that most drug dealers are black or brown. Occasionally, in the course of my work, someone would make a remark suggesting that perhaps the war on drugs is a racist conspiracy to put blacks back in their place. This type of remark was invariably accompanied by nervous laughter, intended to convey the impression that although the idea had crossed their minds, it was not an idea a reasonable person would take seriously. Most people assume the war on drugs was launched in response to the crisis caused by crack cocaine in inner-city neighborhoods. This view holds that the racial disparities in drug convictions and sentences, as well as the rapid explosion of the prison population, reflect nothing more than the government's zealous, but benign, efforts to address rampant drug crime in poor, minority neighborhoods. This view, while understandable, given the sensational media coverage of crack in the 1980s and 1990s, is simply wrong. While it is true that the publicity surrounding crack cocaine led to a dramatic increase in funding for the drug war, as well as to sentencing policies that greatly exacerbated racial disparities in incarceration rates, there is no truth to the notion that the war on drugs was launched in response to crack cocaine. President Ronald Reagan officially announced the current drug war in 1982, before crack became an issue in the media or a crisis in poor black neighborhoods. A few years after the drug war was declared, crack began to spread rapidly in the poor black neighborhoods of Los Angeles and later emerged in cities across the country. The Reagan administration hired staff to publicize the emergence of crack cocaine in 1985 as part of a strategic effort to build public and legislative support for the war. The media campaign was an extraordinary success. Almost overnight, the media was saturated with images of black crack whores, crack dealers, and crack babies, images that seemed to confirm the worst negative racial stereotypes about impoverished inner-city residents. The media bonanza surrounding the new demon drug helped to catapult the war on drugs from an ambitious federal policy to an actual war. The timing of the crack crisis helped to fuel conspiracy theories and general speculation in poor black communities that the war on drugs was part of a genocidal plan by the government to destroy black people in the United States. From the outset, stories circulated on the street that crack and other drugs were being brought into black neighborhoods by the CIA. Eventually, even the Urban League came to take the claims of genocide seriously. In its 1990 report, The State of Black America, it stated, "There is at least one concept that must be recognized if one is to see the pervasive and insidious nature of the drug problem for the African American community, though difficult to accept, that is the concept of genocide." While the conspiracy theories were initially dismissed as far-fetched, if not downright loony, the word on the street turned out to be right, at least to a point. The CIA admitted in 1998 that guerrilla armies it actively supported in Nicaragua were smuggling illegal drugs into the United States, drugs that were making their way onto the streets of inner-city black neighborhoods in the form of crack cocaine. The CIA also admitted that, in the midst of the war on drugs, it blocked law enforcement efforts to investigate illegal drug networks that were helping to fund its covert war in Nicaragua. It bears emphasis that the CIA never admitted, nor has any evidence been revealed to support the claim, that it intentionally sought the destruction of the black community by allowing illegal drugs to be smuggled into the United States. Nonetheless, conspiracy theorists surely must be forgiven for their bold accusation of genocide, in light of the devastation wrought by crack cocaine and the drug war, and the odd coincidence that an illegal drug crisis suddenly appeared in the black community after, not before, a drug war had been declared. In fact, the war on drugs began at a time when illegal drug use was on the decline. During this same time period, however, a war was declared, causing arrests and convictions for drug offenses to skyrocket, especially among people of color. The impact of the drug war has been astounding. In less than 30 years, the U.S. penal population exploded from around 300,000 to more than 2 million, with drug convictions accounting for the majority of the increase. The United States now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, dwarfing the rates of nearly every developed country, even surpassing those in highly repressive regimes like Russia, China, and Iran. In Germany, 93 people are in prison for every 100,000 adults and children. In the United States, the rate is roughly 8 times that, or 750 per 100,000. The racial dimension of mass incarceration is its most striking feature. No other country in the world imprisons so many of its racial or ethnic minorities. The United States imprisons a larger percentage of its black population than South Africa did at the height of apartheid. In Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, it is estimated that 3 out of 4 young black men, and nearly all those in the poorest neighborhoods, can expect to serve time in prison. Similar rates of incarceration can be found in black communities across America. These stark racial disparities cannot be explained by rates of drug crime. Studies show that people of all colors use and sell illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates. If there are significant differences in the surveys to be found, they frequently suggest that whites, particularly white youth, are more likely to engage in drug crime than people of color. That is not what one would guess, however, when entering our nation's prisons and jails, which are overflowing with black and brown drug offenders. In some states, black men have been admitted to prison on drug charges at rates 20 to 50 times greater than those of white men. And in major cities racked by the drug war, as many as 80% of young African American men now have criminal records and are thus subject to legalized discrimination for the rest of their lives. These young men are part of a growing undercaste, permanently locked up and locked out of mainstream society. It may be surprising to some that drug crime was declining, not rising, when a drug war was declared. From a historical perspective, however, the lack of correlation between crime and punishment is nothing new. Sociologists have frequently observed that governments use punishment primarily as a tool of social control, and thus the extent or severity of punishment is often unrelated to actual crime patterns. Michael Tonry explains in Thinking About Crime, governments decide how much punishment they want, and these decisions are in no simple way related to crime rates. This fact, he points out, can be seen most clearly by putting crime and punishment in comparative perspective. Although crime rates in the United States have not been markedly higher than those of other Western countries, the rate of incarceration has soared in the United States while it has remained stable or declined in other countries. Between 1960 and 1990, for example, official crime rates in Finland, Germany, and the United States were close to identical. Yet the U.S. incarceration rate quadrupled, the Finnish rate fell by 60%, and the German rate was stable in that period. Despite similar crime rates, each government chose to impose different levels of punishment. Today, due to recent declines, U.S. crime rates have dipped below the international norm. Nevertheless, the United States now boasts an incarceration rate that is 6 to 10 times greater than that of other industrialized nations, a development directly traceable to the drug war. The only country in the world that even comes close to the American rate of incarceration is Russia, and no other country in the world incarcerates such an astonishing percentage of its racial or ethnic minorities. The stark and sobering reality is that, for reasons largely unrelated to actual crime trends, the American penal system has emerged as a system of social control unparalleled in world history. And while the size of the system alone might suggest that it would touch the lives of most Americans, the primary targets of its control can be defined largely by race. This is an astonishing development, especially given that as recently as the mid-1970s, the most well-respected criminologists were predicting that the prison system would soon fade away. Prison did not deter crime significantly, many experts concluded. Those who had meaningful economic and social opportunities were unlikely to commit crimes regardless of the penalty, while those who went to prison were far more likely to commit crimes again in the future. The growing consensus among experts was perhaps best reflected by the National Advisory Commission on Criminal Justice Standards and Goals, which issued a recommendation in 1973 that no new institutions for adults should be built and existing institutions for juveniles should be closed. This recommendation was based on their finding that the prison, the reformatory, and the jail have achieved only a shocking record of failure. There is overwhelming evidence that these institutions create crime rather than prevent it. These days, activists who advocate a world without prisons are often dismissed as quacks, but only a few decades ago, the notion that our society would be much better off without prisons, and that the end of prisons was more or less inevitable, not only dominated mainstream academic discourse in the field of criminology but also inspired a national campaign by reformers demanding a moratorium on prison construction. Mark Maurer, the executive director of the Sentencing Project, notes that what is most remarkable about the moratorium campaign in retrospect is the context of imprisonment at the time. In 1972, fewer than 350,000 people were being held in prisons and jails nationwide, compared with more than 2 million people today. The rate of incarceration in 1972 was at a level so low that it no longer seems in the realm of possibility, but for moratorium supporters, that magnitude of imprisonment was egregiously high. Supporters of the moratorium effort can be forgiven for being so naive, Maurer suggests, since the prison expansion that was about to take place was unprecedented in human history. No one imagined that the prison population would more than quintuple in their lifetime. It seemed far more likely that prisons would fade away. Far from fading away, it appears that prisons are here to stay. And despite the unprecedented levels of incarceration in the African American community, the civil rights community is oddly quiet. 1 in 3 young African American men is currently under the control of the criminal justice system, in prison, in jail, on probation, or on parole, yet mass incarceration tends to be categorized as a criminal justice issue as opposed to a racial justice or civil rights issue, or crisis. The attention of civil rights advocates has been largely devoted to other issues, such as affirmative action. During the past 20 years, virtually every progressive, national civil rights organization in the country has mobilized and rallied in defense of affirmative action. The struggle to preserve affirmative action in higher education, and thus maintain diversity in the nation's most elite colleges and universities, has consumed much of the attention and resources of the civil rights community and dominated racial justice discourse in the mainstream media, leading the general public to believe that affirmative action is the main battlefront in U.S. race relations, even as our prisons fill with black and brown men. My own experience reflects this dynamic. When I first joined the ACLU, no one imagined that the Racial Justice Project would focus its attention on criminal justice reform. The ACLU was engaged in important criminal justice reform work, but no one suspected that work would eventually become central to the agenda of the Racial Justice Project. The assumption was that the project would concentrate its efforts on defending affirmative action. Shortly after leaving the ACLU, I joined the board of directors of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights of the San Francisco Bay Area. Although the organization included racial justice among its core priorities, reform of the criminal justice system was not, and still is not, a major part of its racial justice work. The Lawyers Committee is not alone. In January 2008, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, an organization composed of the leadership of more than 180 civil rights organizations, sent a letter to its allies and supporters informing them of a major initiative to document the voting record of members of Congress. The letter explained that its forthcoming report would show how each representative and senator cast his or her vote on some of the most important civil rights issues of 2007, including voting rights, affirmative action, immigration, nominations, education, hate crimes, employment, health, housing, and poverty. Criminal justice issues did not make the list. That same broad-based coalition organized a major conference in October 2007, entitled Why We Can't Wait, Reversing the Retreat on Civil Rights, which included panels discussing school integration, employment discrimination, housing and lending discrimination, economic justice, environmental justice, disability rights, age discrimination, and immigrants' rights. Not a single panel was devoted to criminal justice reform. The elected leaders of the African American community have a much broader mandate than civil rights groups, but they, too, frequently overlook criminal justice. In January 2009, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus sent a letter to hundreds of community and organization leaders who have worked with the caucus over the years, soliciting general information about them and requesting that they identify their priorities. More than 35 topics were listed as areas of potential special interest, including taxes, defense, immigration, agriculture, housing, banking, higher education, multimedia, transportation and infrastructure, women, seniors, nutrition, faith initiatives, civil rights, census, economic security, and emerging leaders. No mention was made of criminal justice. Re-entry was listed, but a community leader who was interested in criminal justice reform had to check the box labeled Other. This is not to say that important criminal justice reform work has not been done. Civil rights advocates have organized vigorous challenges to specific aspects of the new caste system. One notable example is the successful challenge led by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to a racist drug sting operation in Tulia, Texas. The 1999 drug bust incarcerated almost 15% of the black population of the town, based on the uncorroborated false testimony of a single informant hired by the sheriff of Tulia. More recently, civil rights groups around the country have helped to launch legal attacks and vibrant grassroots campaigns against felon disenfranchisement laws and have strenuously opposed discriminatory crack sentencing laws and guidelines, as well as zero-tolerance policies that effectively funnel youth of color from schools to jails. The National ACLU recently developed a racial justice program that includes criminal justice issues among its core priorities and has created a promising drug law reform project. And thanks to the aggressive advocacy of the ACLU, NAACP, and other civil rights organizations around the country, racial profiling is widely condemned, even by members of law enforcement who once openly embraced the practice. Still, despite these significant developments, there seems to be a lack of appreciation for the enormity of the crisis at hand. There is no broad-based movement brewing to end mass incarceration and no advocacy effort that approaches in scale the fight to preserve affirmative action. There also remains a persistent tendency in the civil rights community to treat the criminal justice system as just another institution infected with lingering racial bias. The NAACP's website offers one example. As recently as May 2008, one could find a brief introduction to the organization's criminal justice work in the section entitled Legal Department. The introduction explained that despite the civil rights victories of our past, racial prejudice still pervades the criminal justice system. Visitors to the website were urged to join the NAACP in order to protect the hard-earned civil rights gains of the past 3 decades. No one visiting the website would learn that the mass incarceration of African Americans had already eviscerated many of the hard-earned gains it urged its members to protect. Imagine if civil rights organizations and African American leaders in the 1940s had not placed Jim Crow segregation at the forefront of their racial justice agenda. It would have seemed absurd, given that racial segregation was the primary vehicle of racialized social control in the United States during that period. This book argues that mass incarceration is, metaphorically, the new Jim Crow and that all those who care about social justice should fully commit themselves to dismantling this new racial caste system. Mass incarceration, not attacks on affirmative action or lax civil rights enforcement, is the most damaging manifestation of the backlash against the civil rights movement. The popular narrative that emphasizes the death of slavery and Jim Crow and celebrates the nation's triumph over race with the election of Barack Obama is dangerously misguided. The colorblind public consensus that prevails in America today, i.e. the widespread belief that race no longer matters, has blinded us to the realities of race in our society and facilitated the emergence of a new caste system. Clearly, much has changed in my thinking about the criminal justice system since I passed that bright orange poster stapled to a telephone pole 10 years ago. For me, the new caste system is now as obvious as my own face in the mirror. Like an optical illusion, one in which the embedded image is impossible to see until its outline is identified, the new caste system lurks invisibly within the maze of rationalizations we have developed for persistent racial inequality. It is possible, quite easy, in fact, never to see the embedded reality. Only after years of working on criminal justice reform did my own focus finally shift, and then the rigid caste system slowly came into view. Eventually it became obvious. Now it seems odd that I could not see it before. Knowing as I do the difficulty of seeing what most everyone insists does not exist, I anticipate that this book will be met with skepticism or something worse. For some, the characterization of mass incarceration as a racial caste system may seem like a gross exaggeration, if not hyperbole. Yes, we may have classes in the United States, vaguely defined upper, middle, and lower classes, and we may even have an underclass, a group so estranged from mainstream society that it is no longer in reach of the mythical ladder of opportunity, but we do not, many will insist, have anything in this country that resembles a caste. The aim of this book is not to venture into the long-running, vigorous debate in the scholarly literature regarding what does and does not constitute a caste system. I use the term racial caste in this book the way it is used in common parlance to denote a stigmatized racial group locked into an inferior position by law and custom. Jim Crow and slavery were caste systems. So is our current system of mass incarceration. It may be helpful, in attempting to understand the basic nature of the new caste system, to think of the criminal justice system, the entire collection of institutions and practices that comprise it, not as an independent system but rather as a gateway into a much larger system of racial stigmatization and permanent marginalization. This larger system, referred to here as mass incarceration, is a system that locks people not only behind actual bars in actual prisons, but also behind virtual bars and virtual walls, walls that are invisible to the naked eye but function nearly as effectively as Jim Crow laws once did at locking people of color into a permanent second-class citizenship. The term mass incarceration refers not only to the criminal justice system but also to the larger web of laws, rules, policies, and customs that control those labeled criminals both in and out of prison. Once released, former prisoners enter a hidden underworld of legalized discrimination and permanent social exclusion. They are members of America's new undercaste. The language of caste may well seem foreign or unfamiliar to some. Public discussions about racial caste in America are relatively rare. We avoid talking about caste in our society because we are ashamed of our racial history. We also avoid talking about race. We even avoid talking about class. Conversations about class are resisted in part because there is a tendency to imagine that one's class reflects upon one's character. What is key to America's understanding of class is the persistent belief, despite all evidence to the contrary, that anyone, with the proper discipline and drive, can move from a lower class to a higher class. We recognize that mobility may be difficult, but the key to our collective self-image is the assumption that mobility is always possible, so failure to move up reflects on one's character. By extension, the failure of a race or ethnic group to move up reflects very poorly on the group as a whole. What is completely missed in the rare public debates today about the plight of African Americans is that a huge percentage of them are not free to move up at all. It is not just that they lack opportunity, attend poor schools, or are plagued by poverty. They are barred by law from doing so. And the major institutions with which they come into contact are designed to prevent their mobility. To put the matter starkly, the current system of control permanently locks a huge percentage of the African American community out of the mainstream society and economy. The system operates through our criminal justice institutions, but it functions more like a caste system than a system of crime control. Viewed from this perspective, the so-called underclass is better understood as an undercaste, a lower caste of individuals who are permanently barred by law and custom from mainstream society. Although this new system of racialized social control purports to be colorblind, it creates and maintains racial hierarchy much as earlier systems of control did. Like Jim Crow and slavery, mass incarceration operates as a tightly networked system of laws, policies, customs, and institutions that operate collectively to ensure the subordinate status of a group defined largely by race. This argument may be particularly hard to swallow given the election of Barack Obama. Many will wonder how a nation that just elected its first black president could possibly have a racial caste system. It's a fair question. But as discussed in Chapter 6, there is no inconsistency whatsoever between the election of Barack Obama to the highest office in the land and the existence of a racial caste system in the era of colorblindness. The current system of control depends on black exceptionalism. It is not disproved or undermined by it. Others may wonder how a racial caste system could exist when most Americans, of all colors, oppose race discrimination and endorse colorblindness. Yet as we shall see in the pages that follow, racial caste systems do not require racial hostility or overt bigotry to thrive. They need only racial indifference, as Martin Luther King Jr. warned more than 45 years ago. The recent decisions by some state legislatures, most notably New York's, to repeal or reduce mandatory drug sentencing laws have led some to believe that the system of racial control described in this book is already fading away. Such a conclusion, I believe, is a serious mistake. Many of the states that have reconsidered their harsh sentencing schemes have done so not out of concern for the lives and families that have been destroyed by these laws or the racial dimensions of the drug war, but out of concern for bursting state budgets in a time of economic recession. In other words, the racial ideology that gave rise to these laws remains largely undisturbed. Changing economic conditions or rising crime rates could easily result in a reversal of fortunes for those who commit drug crimes, particularly if the drug criminals are perceived to be black and brown. Equally important to understand is this: merely reducing sentence length, by itself, does not disturb the basic architecture of the new Jim Crow. So long as large numbers of African Americans continue to be arrested and labeled drug criminals, they will continue to be relegated to a permanent second-class status upon their release, no matter how much, or how little, time they spend behind bars. The system of mass incarceration is based on the prison label, not prison time. Skepticism about the claims made here is warranted. There are important differences, to be sure, among mass incarceration, Jim Crow, and slavery, the three major racialized systems of control adopted in the United States to date. Failure to acknowledge the relevant differences, as well as their implications, would be a disservice to racial justice discourse. Many of the differences are not as dramatic as they initially appear, however, others serve to illustrate the ways in which systems of racialized social control have managed to morph, evolve, and adapt to changes in the political, social, and legal context over time. Ultimately, I believe that the similarities between these systems of control overwhelm the differences and that mass incarceration, like its predecessors, has been largely immunized from legal challenge. If this claim is substantially correct, the implications for racial justice advocacy are profound. With the benefit of hindsight, surely we can see that piecemeal policy reform or litigation alone would have been a futile approach to dismantling Jim Crow segregation. While those strategies certainly had their place, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the concomitant cultural shift would never have occurred without the cultivation of a critical political consciousness in the African American community and the widespread, strategic activism that flowed from it. Likewise, the notion that the new Jim Crow can ever be dismantled through traditional litigation and policy reform strategies that are wholly disconnected from a major social movement seems fundamentally misguided. Such a movement is impossible, though, if those most committed to abolishing racial hierarchy continue to talk and behave as if a state-sponsored racial caste system no longer exists. If we continue to tell ourselves the popular myths about racial progress or, worse yet, if we say to ourselves that the problem of mass incarceration is just too big, too daunting for us to do anything about and that we should instead direct our energies to battles that might be more easily won, history will judge us harshly. A human rights nightmare is occurring on our watch. A new social consensus must be forged about race and the role of race in defining the basic structure of our society, if we hope ever to abolish the new Jim Crow. This new consensus must begin with dialogue, a conversation that fosters a critical consciousness, a key prerequisite to effective social action. This book is an attempt to ensure that the conversation does not end with nervous laughter.
Well, ain't gonna be no nervous kiki here. Katherine, Massey, Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. That is the conclusion of audio segment 1. We will pick up. We are still in the introduction. It is not possible to write a relatively short book. That is where we will resume. The number 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Okay. Before we get to folks who dialed in and such, this book started Gus T's worst books of all time. It specifically was number 6, if memory serves. Just based on what we have read, I think it's going to move up to 4. Have to maybe get to the end of the introduction, but I looked back at the books that are in front of it, continued reading. I think it's going to move up to the 4th worst book of all time. easily. One of those reasons I can tell you right now, the books that end up on that list, especially high, once I've gathered enough evidence to determine you are deliberately lying, like Dorothy Roberts in the Mixed Race Project, deliberately lie. Isabel Wilkerson Case, which reminds me so much of this goofy book. We had a listener who dialed into, I'm going to correct Gus T, you not saying case correctly. Woo! Man, I have so... Anyway, Caste. I guess I didn't take their suggestion. Beat it. It reminds me so much of that lame book, which I guess... I don't know. I guess I think even less of Isabel Wilkerson's book. Because, like, did she just copy New Jim Crow to a degree? Anyway, cowbells galore. My bell would be broken. Anyway, but books where there's enough evidence, you are lying, and willfully so. She told us last week, Michelle Alexander, especially when it starts to be, whoa, you are lying about lots of things, just over and over. And she told us last week that she was giving talks to half-empty rooms. Do you remember that? It reminded me of Obama at Esalen Books, because we just heard that. They said that when his book, Dreams from My Father, came out in the 90s, that he was going to Esalen Books, and it was half empty, and blah, 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 and nobody, who is this dude, and this wacky name, and blah, 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 and that sort of thing. But reminded me of that. She said she was doing the same thing, and she was saying, hey, I didn't have no big-time bestseller immediately when this book was published in 2010. It took a long while to catch on. And I said, from last week, I don't think that's, I mean, the sales, maybe, but I do not agree in thinking that nobody really paid attention and, this didn't really cause a ripple at first. That is a massive lie. Evidence. This is from The Nation, 2010, August 2010. Black men's jail time hits entire communities. Going right to the top. Well, this is Charlene Hunter Galt. Well, actually, it's a panel discussion that goes on yearly. It's not really a conference, but just judging from the reaction, we had quite an audience. The thing was sold out for weeks in advance. And it's interracial. It's intergenerational. Seemed like I could have put my cowbell right there. It's professionals. It's non-professionals. And I have never had reaction to any of our panels. And we've always had good reaction. But never like this. Talk of the Nation. All right, so I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Talk of the Nation. Last week on Martha's Vineyard, Harvard University's W.E.B. Du Bois Institute took up the issue of disproportionate incarceration among African American males, which some have called epidemic in America. The event, hosted by Harvard University professor Henry Louis Gates, Cowbell, brings together some of the nation's foremost thinkers. Gates said he hoped the discussion would raise the consciousness of well-educated people. Wonder who he's talking about. Well-educated people. About the horrible injustice that is occurring to the black male. And they say, well, who was at the panel here that was sold out weeks in advance? Michelle Alexander was here at the conference. Let's see. It says, let's turn now to Michelle Alexander. She's an associate professor of Moritz College of Law, Ohio State. Her book, New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration, the Age of Colorblindness. She provided the thesis for the lecture series, and Michelle Alexander joins us from a studio at Ohio State University. This is what I remember from 2010. Why you lying? And then you're going to wait and polish it up, wait 10 years to do the 10-year anniversary and say, oh, shucks, nobody even talked about my book when it came out. Lie. You lie. And it's not just this. Martha, this is Martha's Vineyard. How many of you been to Martha's Vineyard? And it was sold out weeks. And how many people, authors, get to go to Martha's Vineyard and have their book set the thesis for a sold out talk, much less a black author? You ain't got to lie. Now, I said it's not just that. The late Jesse Jackson Sr. did a beautiful write-up for her in a black newspaper, which is so important. In 2010, it wasn't no, I got to wait. I got to see what people think. I'll do one in 2013. I'll do one in 2010. Jesse Jackson Sr. stopped and wrote a glowing review of this book. NPR had her on repeat. How many Negro authors write a book about racism, and NPR talks about their book repeatedly? They did for the Mixed Race Project. They did for look. They did for Caste. They did for The Hate You Get. You can run the books on my worst list that will really screw your brain computer up about what racism is, how it works, what it means to be white. NPR loves them. In fact, everybody loved. Jesse Jackson said this book is great. This book is trash. This book is. You ain't got. That's one that's like, wait a minute. You came back to do a 10-year anniversary, and you could have just. You don't even need to say that. Just move forward. I'm glad the book is successful. I hope it's helped some people learn a little bit. Shout out to the locked up black dudes, and let's replace whites. That's nobody really read. You ain't. We could go back and look, man. It's racks. It's dozens and dozens. How many books get that sort of push? They had her on Bill Moyers immediately. How many first-time authors get that sort of push for their book? You ain't got to lie. And it's just piles of lies. And really, this now, I listened to this twice, this first audio segment. I told you this was going to be ugly because I knew it was going to be this. I knew it from the moment I looked at the title and the moment that I knew she had a white parent. I knew this was going to be total nonsense. And you could even add the third one. My views are so different from the other non-white people. Once I started hearing black people who don't read, and I'm talking about C.O.W.S listeners too, once I started hearing black people say, this book is amazing. You got, we don't even read. What do you mean this book is amazing? Same thing happened with Caste too. What do you mean this book is amazing? What are you talking about? We don't even read. Now I even have the extra pullback, hey. So you all read this book and didn't know she had a white parent. I did not read this book. I knew she had a white parent and that she spent time, her formative years, Pacific Northwest with Gus T. Not same time, obviously, but I knew that way back when this book was published. It gave me pause, caution. Y'all say you read the whole thing and didn't even know. We are Team Limp Noodle. That's all of us. Gus T. All I can conclude, man, and it's easy to dupe people who do not read, are not well informed. It is very easy. And real talk, you put some high yellow non-white female with a white parent in front of a lot of us, Meghan Markle, Alicia Keys, Dorothy Dandridge, you She got a nice smile and good hair, in quotes. For a lot of us, subconsciously, consciously, that will impact much more than putting someone who looks like Isabel Wilkerson, dark-skinned black female. Someone, hey, Dorothy Roberts. Isabel Wilkerson was married to a white guy. Dorothy Roberts also has a white parent. Get all these folks a little bit more what they call it white adjacent. Less melanin black, get back. We don't want no crystal black author at Martha's Vineyard. We're not going to sell out weeks in advance for the well-educated. Come here, no crystal black, talk about no system of white supremacy, racist. We'll hear one white parent, one non-white parent talk about Jim Crow. Limp Noodle, that is us. Team Limp Noodle. Gus T trying to get off that team because it sucks. That's why white people keep stomping on us. Attica, I have to say that about 50,000 times. Attica. Let's see. Folks who have commentary and or emails. Do I do the commentary or the email? If we have folks who knew that this book was written by a non-white person with one white parent prior to reading, you can let us know. I'll share one email, then see folks who have commentary as well. Let's see. Email number 1. Please disregard my reading 1 email. This was when I was confused or did not forewarn we were going to read the 10th anniversary edition preface and then rewind to the 2010 publication. Very interested to read this text again. I read it when it was first published long before I became familiar with the work of Dr. Welsing, Mr. Fuller, and the cows. I will add Dr. Welsing, Mr. Fuller, Context of White Supremacy, all predate the new Jim Crow. Much obliged. I was not aware that the author had a white parent when I first read the text. Given what I know now, I think it is significant information. I do not remember much about the text. I have read a little ahead in the text, and I was confused at one point listening to the new preface because it seemed like it repeated some of the things stated further along in the original text. Probably. I thought there was a glitch in the tape, and I was listening to the original text. For example, the prison hallway metaphor when discussing why the majority of people incarcerated are for violent crimes as opposed to drug offenses. Maybe she wanted to make sure we got it. Maybe people were confused about that metaphor. She's talked to them over the years, so she wanted to kind of double down on, get some clarity. I'm guessing. Acknowledgments. John Powell, director of the Kirwan Institute for Study of Race and Ethnicity. The institute was founded in 2003 and named after a former OSU president, Dr. Powell. Black male, was the founding director. He spells his name in lowercase in the belief that we should be part of the universe, not over it as capitals signify. He is an expert in civil rights and structural racism. He authored a text, Belonging Without Othering, Victims Guaranteed Qualified. He is currently director of the Othering and Belonging Institute, Victims Guaranteed Qualified. 2. My husband, Carter Stewart, as a federal prosecutor, he does not share my views about the criminal justice system, but his different worldview. Ellipses. I found this fascinating when I first read it years ago, and I still do. I don't think I have ever read something similar in a text. What exactly is his view, since he is a prosecuting attorney, and why did she feel it necessary to put this in the text? I looked up his picture online, and he appears to be a black male. I looked online for Mr. Stewart as well, and it seems he is also a black male from what I've seen. It seems that they both are Stanford alum. See, you take over the world. You go get you a Stanford, spend a little time in Palo Alto, and whew, boy, you add about 20 IQ points. But many of the folks that I have seen who are more critical of this book, like myself, that is also something that they point to, like, whoa, not only does this author have a one white parent, you're married to a federal prosecutor? Like, wait a minute. This is one of the dudes who's actually locking up the black males that you're talking about disproportionately in the book. I don't think he's a federal prosecutor anymore, but he was for many years. He was at the time that they wrote this book, and for many years afterwards in the state of Ohio, where they lock up a lot of black dudes. Like, what? And not just he's a prosecutor, but like he's not even trying to be a so-called progressive counter-racist prosecutor. He doesn't even agree with your viewpoint. Whoa. I mean, yes, many folks have looked at that and said, that seems a bit contradictory, almost like a part of the very system you are criticizing for locking up black males, in a way, subsidized this book. You being in a comfortable house, comfortable position, where he can take time off, take care of the kids, you can do your writing and all the rest of it, like, huh. Continuing. Preface. This book is not for everyone. I am writing this book for all those trapped within America's latest caste system. Exactly who are you talking about trapped? All non-white people on the planet, perhaps? For sure. I think she's talking about greater confinement specifically, but distinction not made. I thought that portion where she talks about who she's writing this book for, the people who don't really understand and all that, I thought that seemed more like she was writing this text for people classified as white, those highly educated folks at Martha's Vineyard. That's who it seemed like she was writing this book for. I think I said last week, it did not seem like she was writing this book for the black males who have been trapped, or even the non-white people who are victims of white supremacy in general, whether they're in greater confinement or not. Even that's one I would even think about. I'm going to go back and get that sentence where she talks about who she wrote this book for. I find it amazing the number of black people who jump up and down about this book. She did not say she wrote this book for black people. She didn't even say she wrote this book for people who understand racism is a problem. Racism within so-called criminal justice is a problem. She didn't say she wrote that book for you all. How is it that Jesse Jackson would seem like he was already in that group? Like, how are so many black people the ones who are talking about and quoting and citing and praising this text? It should be white people. Martha's Vineyard, they should be the ones like, she wrote it for us and it really changed our views. Like, wow, we're going, Mumia, we got you. That, you know. Continuing. Introduction. What has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society. Ended racial caste in America 10 years ago, I would have argued strenuously against the central claim made here, namely that something akin to a racial caste system currently exists in the United States. What does the author mean by basic structure of our society? Good question. Racial caste. Where have we heard that before? Indeed. I came away thinking that maybe the author at some point as an adult did not think racism existed in the U.S. I can only pause. Michelle Alexander, her formative, that's why we had the audio that we did today. Now, any of you here, archive, live, I wouldn't care if you're listening to this like, well, maybe if racism has been replaced, it would be difficult to kind of process and think about all this. But for those of us who lived during the time of white supremacy racism, do you think at 17 years of age, boy, girl, whatever, do you think if you lived in a house, a so-called interracial house, with one white parent, one black parent, where your white relatives are so racist that they stop speaking to your white mom? Your black father gets pulled over by the police all the time, where you're right there. Can't get a raise on the job. You all get evicted and such. You all move to Ashland, Oregon, with a Negro population of 0.1%. where the Klan dominant. I need to look for the early 1980s to see. I would be willing to wager like a nice chunk of change, like $100 or more. I bet the Klan marched in Ashland or in some part of that county, that region of Oregon, in her time during high school. Do you think it would be possible to live in an environment in a major U.S. city with 0.1% Negroes, and you have somehow concluded, based on logic and evidence, not some form of racial psychosis, but based on logic and lucid thinking, that racism does not exist in the U.S.? Even, real talk, William Shockley's Palo Alto. We read the very book, Palo Alto, Michael Smith. I don't know how, Negro, I was in Palo Alto for a minute. I don't know how you gonna hang out down there for all that time, man. I think we really got no. Hey, Condi Rice, how you doing? Good to see Cory Booker. Good to see Cal Bell. How you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you. We ain't got no racism. They got tons of black people at Stanford. Richard Sherman, my black brother. Good to see you. Let's see. 2, evils of Jim Crow. Oh, he expects there will be a lot of metaphors in the text. I think we've already heard a bunch. Colorblind got a big one in the title. Evils of Jim Crow are behind us. We have a long way to go. Multiracial democracy. There's one right there. We've made real progress. Join with the allies of racial progress. What? The evils of Jim Crow are behind us? What? You've got to be kidding. No, she's not kidding. That's why I said, see, like, this book is so repulsive. Like, it's not like a little bit repulsive. Like, and I just read the title. Like, this is not no, oh man, you hating Gus, so you got a thing against light-skinned black female. No. You hating because she got a white man. No. Although that is important. No. I'm just reading what she got. I'm just reading the title. Colorblind? What? And you grew, any of you would have to tell me, Gus T, look here. You're not even being logical. I live in a sundown town, racially restricted region. It's 0.1% black people. I don't think about no racism. Nobody ever brings up racism. They don't side-eye me. The police don't stop me. We don't have no Negro nicknames and no tackiness. They're like, what are you talking about, man? My friends come over to the house, visit, park in the driveway. Nobody's ever called us a Negro, cursed at us. Nothing like that. They don't throw trash in our yard. What are you talking about? Oh, let me come visit in the daytime. Escorted. Don't lie to me, man. Don't lie. If her father, who is no longer with us, I'd want her black dad. You tell me. I ain't seen no racism in Ashland. Oh, okay. I would believe that before I believe Michelle Alexander, because you lie. Woo, the lies are too many to count. Let's see. Racial bias. Conscious and unconscious bias. It was not just another institution infected with racial bias, but rather a different beast entirely. That's double metaphors right there. Infected, beast, all terms to avoid if one wants to be accurate when discussing racism, white supremacy. Comprehensive and well-disguised system of racialized social control that functions in a manner strikingly similar to Jim Crow. And I really don't know what she means when she says Jim Crow. That's a term that I've for a long time encouraged that we not use. Metaphor, it's vague. System of white supremacy. What are we talking about? Global system of racism, white supremacy seems like a more accurate term. I agree. 5. Attention of civil rights advocates has been largely devoted to other issues such as affirmative action, even as our prisons filled with black and brown males. I wonder what the author thinks of affirmative action in 2025, since the data is clear that white women were the greatest beneficiaries. I even have to, this is another one where you are a liar, Michelle Alexander. And it's in so many different ways here. One, anybody, you bring up affirmative action, even at this time period, 2010, the data was flagrant. It was public. Who had benefited most from affirmative action? They were teaching this in college classes before 2010, that white women. Our guest, admitted racist Timothy Wise, he wrote a report in the 90s about white women being the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action. So you have to be kind of a limp noodle to not know that white women, I mean, and to not even say, I say that all the time, to bring up affirmative action and not even get a sentence. Oh yeah, by the way, that's a racist lie. White people have benefited most, but we'll continue. To not even get a sentence in, mass deception. And deliberately so, because I think she's aware of this. She went to Stanford. She's supposed to know. But Ann, about the so-called focus and attention of civil rights advocates, who are you talking about? Because to me, this gets at a bigger lie of the book. The notion that non-white people victims of white supremacy were not focused on prison reform before this stupid lying book came out is a massive lie and a massive insult. Again, we are team limp noodle. A lot of us, as stated, we don't read seriously about racism. We don't study this problem. We didn't read. Many people said this was kind of the book that started them to reading seriously about racism. Their whole libraries filled with books about racism and prison decades before this lying, goofy book came out. Most of us would not know that. White people have deliberately kept those books from us, or kept us from the library, or kept us with racist teachers, or lots of things. But either way, that does not change the fact we are team limp noodle mostly, and this is just not true. There has been time that's why it would not stand out as much. Like, wait a minute, what did I say? Attica. There are so many omissions in this book, and that's a form of lying. If you have pertinent information and you don't share, you're lying. If you need the stupid quick example, if you know Swango done got my sandwich, you watched him pepper it up, and I come in and I sit down and take a bite out of it, and you don't say nothing, that is omission. And not to be that fatal, but I mean, you get the point. Anyway, there are lots of black people, non-white people, period, who had been doing prison reform work, counter-racism work for decades, before she was even born. And she totally ignores many of these folks to the detriment of her work, to the detriment and integrity of the very work that she's doing here about prisons. And part of it is just on one term. You can pay attention as we go and see, is Gus T lying? Does he have some sort of bias against her because she have a white parent? Do you hear the term prison industrial complex? If you've heard that term before, that used to be the term that was used, and it still is. I still hear it, PCI, or PIC, excuse me. But that was used frequently, shorthand, for all the racism and locking up all these black people, black dudes especially, and non-white people. But that was the way it was talked about for the longest. Is that term even in this book? If you want to, hey, fine, I got it. Fuller says that nothing incorrect about making up new terms, but if not using prison industrial complex is a part of the omission of all this other work that might even be more direct in talking about what the problem is, or omitting all that other work is a part of whatever agenda that you have with how you are presenting to Martha's Vineyard, that's why this is number 4 worst books ever. Number 4, New Jim Crow. And you can just pay attention. Is Gus lying? Am I wrong? I can see I got no problem with that. Prison industrial complex. Is that a term? Is it in the book? Continuing. Lots of things predated New Jim Crow. Comprehensive and we read that one. Attention, read that one. One notable example is the successful challenge led by NAACP Legal Defense Fund to a racist drug sting operation in Tulia, Texas. The 1999 drug bust incarcerated almost 15% of the black population of the town based on the uncorroborated false testimony of a single informant. I've been reading about informants all week with these FBI files, and Dr. Welsing, wacky, hired by the sheriff of Tulia. I don't remember reading about this, but I suspect it has been discussed on the cows. Yes. See Texas Historical Association. I think it's 2013 we talked about this. White author who wrote a book about the situation in Tulia. But even this, where she talks about, it's almost presented as these are aberrations in terms of the full pattern of so-called civil rights groups, whatever that means, non-white people or whatever group she think are attempting to counter racism that have not adequately discussed prisons and racism. That is a lie. And again, with the omission, Angela Davis had a conference in the late 1990s with thousands in attendance. That seems like a lot of groups focused on racism, prisons. Angela Davis, as I said, been talking about this for decades. She was talking about this before Alexander was even born, as were many others. But that's one illustration amongst me. Oh, and it was one of Jon Burge. She is selective with which events she wants to name. She picked Tulia, Texas. There's lots of, incident. They lock up so many black people. Pick your police department. She could have picked Seattle. We had consent decree here too. Chicago. She's a Midwest girl. I'm just saying that because she was born there in Illinois. Chicago. Jon Burge, putting the electric cattle prods on black males' testicles, fabricating convictions and all the rest of it. That's right in the same state where she grew up. She doesn't mention him at all. That's not colorblind either. That is very deliberate, and you had a lot of local activism talking about this and bringing all this to the forefront, getting compensation for the victims, making this something that's taught about in public schools in Chicago. Decades of activism, even connected back to the local Black Panther Party. But that's not in the book at all. That's why I'm saying, there's so many lies in the book, and many other critics have pointed that out, that, man, she is ignoring, not one or two activists, decades of activist work by really important people, black people, who have been talking about racism in prison, some of them before she was even born, in a much more accurate way. Let's see, 7. Thanks to the aggressive advocacy of the ACLU, NAACP, and other civil, and even the groups that she's mentioning are very white adjacent. What do I mean? The NAACP was headed by literally Walter White, who was so bright he could pass for white, and Mr. Joel Spingarn, race soldier who was literally soldiering and informing, even though he's classified as white, but informing to the military industrial complex what them niggers up to. He's spying. And president of the NAACP. They still give out awards for him. But these are very white adjacent, they in the ACLU, white adjacent, white acceptable so-called organizations. She didn't name Rainbow Push, Jesse Jackson. She didn't mention Al Sharpton's network. She didn't mention the context of white supremacy. She didn't mention the Black Panther Party. There's a lot of groups that she could have mentioned that have talked about the system of white supremacy. But if you wrote this lame book for people like her white mom, well, I don't want to mention them. That might upset my white audience. Then they won't invite me to Martha's Vineyard. See, mess that up. 8. The Colorblind Public, number 4 worst book ever. The Colorblind Public Consensus that prevails in America today, i.e. the widespread belief that race no longer matters. How did you conclude that there was a widespread belief? Amongst whom? I think this book may be dangerous to non-white people. This is me. This is our author reading. I'll start over. Our listener writing, sorry. I think this book may be dangerous to non-white people because of inaccuracies which may lead to confusion about the global system of racism, white supremacy. The only change I would make is I don't think these are inaccuracies. I think these are lies. I don't have a Stanford education. I think I would be a little bit smarter. Person writing this, I don't think you have a Stanford education. I could be wrong. Go Cardinal if you do. My fault. I love me some Palo Alto. But I'm just saying, like, this is not no ignorant person here. Shouldn't be these types of inaccuracies and omissions in the book. That's what I'm saying. Stanford impressed me. They got enough data. You get some Dr. William Shockley files and see, does he seem like he's colorblind? Heard Dr. Shockley this week, but he played with Dr. Welsing. 9. I use the term racial caste in this book the way it is used in common parlance to denote a stigmatized racial group locked into an inferior position by law and custom. Isn't by definition a racial group locked in all that anyway? How would a racial group be anything other than an inferior positioned organization of people? Well, not even organization, but just mass of people, subjects. Jim Crow and slavery were caste systems, gateway into a much larger system of racial stigmatization. From this introduction, this text seems as if it's going to be similar to many respects to Isabel Wilkerson's text, Caste. I said the same thing, and already they are closely coupled. Caste being number 3 on my worst books of all time. New Jim Crow, number 4. Let's see. 10. Others may wonder how a racial caste system could exist when most Americans of all colors oppose race discrimination and endorse color blindness, need only racial indifference. VGQ, victims guaranteed qualified. Where's the author's evidence that this is true? That's, you are supposed to be a scholar, Stanford educated legal scholar at that, and your husband's a prosecutor. So, I mean, this is an evidence-based household, right? Or I don't know, the prosecutor, you just get to go and make up whatever you want to and indict a ham sandwich. That's what they say. I don't know. I mean, you'd have to give me some hard evidence on any of this. Most Americans, whatever that means, Mr. Fuller, oppose race. How did you conclude this? Even, you old coward, you can't even say most white people. She couldn't even write that and get invited to Martha's Vineyard. Most white people oppose race discrimination. I would have said the same thing. How in the Christ did you come to that conclusion? In 2010, 1910, 2030? How did you come to that conclusion? Where's the footnote? Where's the evidence? You don't have it. Okay. Your white mom? Wait a minute. Whoa. This is why I said, don't you lie to me. Woo! I'd have to strain and remember, like, you can't call Michelle Alexander no names. You can't call Michelle Alexander no names. But this is one. You don't tell me most Americans say we don't agree with racism. You too cowardly even say most Americans don't support racism, you coward. That's why you're so cowardly you didn't include that you got white parents and that your white grandpa stopped speaking to your white mom because she married a negro. Now, does that sound like, and then they came and say, we changed, my white granddad, he voted for Jesse Jackson. I don't even believe that. That sounds so tacky. Like, I'm not racist. I voted for Obama 8 times. I love me some Michelle. But if we made so much change, you could have put that in the book. You didn't do it. Nothing about her white family's conduct or the treatment of her black dad in Ashland and at IBM. Nothing about that experience tells me, matter of fact, look here. Go drive through Ashland late at night. I'm talking to Michelle. You coward. Go drive through your hometown late at night. Raggedy car. Make sure the sun go down. Drive after 9 and tell me, hey, we don't agree with no racism. And I played the report. They said, Ashland, we had made progress. We a sunrise town. Now, still on the census says 0.1% nigger. In fact, my challenge, you coward, Michelle Alexander, get a tan this summer and go drive through Ashland at night. 11, abolishing racial hierarchy. We need to abolish the global system of racism, white supremacy, and replace it with justice. Facts. Book paints with a broad brush metaphor. Relatively little is said here about the unique experience of women. This book focuses on the experience of African American males in the new caste system. In my experience, whenever the term broad brush is used, it is interpreted as being very negative. And is this an attempt to deflect any criticism by white people of this text? How does one take a book like this seriously with a statement like that? I think this may, and I'm guessing here, and I've already been very explicit about my views about this text, but I think this may have been, she's smart. She went to Stanford. That's what I'm saying. Like, Jesus Christ, like, you are not a stupid person. I think she is intelligent enough to know. And plus, she touched on it in the new preface for the anniversary edition. We heard it last week. One of the 3 questions was, why did you focus on these no-count privileged black males? I suspect she knew that was going to be a problem in advance. White people don't want to hear no sympathetic text about Leroy, and real talk, many black people do not either. So let me cut that off before y'all even get started. And it didn't even work. She had to come around and address it again. I know I'm not talking about white women. I know I'm not talking about females and gay people and the wheelchair and lesbians. I know transgender. I know. I'm just talking about Leroy for the most part. I'm trying to be scientific in what I'm doing here. I know you just forgive me. I'm going to try and do my best. Maybe other people. And she came back to that when she did the new preface. I suspect she knows. We might run into a problem having a book that's predominantly talking about Leroy, her black dad. She saw they pull him over everywhere. You don't care about no black male. Chapter 1, appealing the racism and vulnerability of lower class whites. Chapter 5, the chapter discusses the experiences of white people in this new caste system. Although they have not been primary targets of the drug war, they have been harmed by it. Did I hear that before someplace? I could have sworn. The white victims of, we'll put a pin there. I could have sworn we have heard this once, thrice, maybe even more than that. But we'll get back. We'll get back. Let's see. Folks who dialed in with a hand up, email again untiljustice@gmail.com. Our caller 5962. Did you have commentary to share? Proceed.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. Just a couple things real quick. Most of it you already touched on. What stood out to me was the part where she's talking about the elected leaders of African American community have a much broader mandate than civil rights groups, but they too frequently overlook criminal justice. It just brings out to me that if you don't understand the system of racism, white supremacy, racism, what it is, how it works, then everything else will only confuse you. And so maybe they are not overlooking the criminal justice, but they are told that since the leaders of African Americans are people classified as white, they're being told that if you don't overlook criminal justice, then your job may be in jeopardy and or your freedom. And then the other thing that stood out to me, again, with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where they tried that racist sting that took place in 1999 in Tulia, Texas. I just looked it up really quick to see if it was classified as a sundown town. And though it says that it may not have been a historical sense sundown town, it does say that the maids and laborers were in areas called Sunset Addition, where they were expected to work on one side of the train tracks and then when nightfall came, return to the other side of the train tracks, which sounds like a sundown town to me. I think that it was also notable that she left out the part that the non-black targets in that sting, so the white people in that sting that were arrested, or almost exclusively individuals who were in interracial relationships, whatever that means, inside the Black community. So that part was left out. And I think that is everything that I had for, so I'll mute my line.
How interesting, much obliged, sir. How interesting a pattern of failure to disclose around the bedroom integration, even personally. Now, she does talk about it when she does interviews about this book, and she has subsequently for years, but again, my view, to have all these, but particularly if you're going to mention dad in the book, you mention mom in the book. Why is that a sentence? In my view, it is certainly relevant if you're going to be talking about colorblind and all the racism that they experienced even when their own family. Much obliged, sir. Tulia, important case as well. I'm going to get back even to the elected black, non-white elected officials who said something, but that's for sure true. President Obama and many others, you get told what to talk about, what to do, what not to do. All of the leaders of black people are white. Facts. I'll rewind and share a few. The initial report that I read in the intro that talked about her white mom, black dad, their struggles being in Ashland, that was not published in 2010. That was 2011, a little bit later, but still very early on from when this book was originally released. Let's see. I thought it was, at least for me, this book, she says it's for Nicole, Jonathan, and Corinne. Those are her 3 children who have a white grandmother. That just stood out to me. This book is not dedicated to all the black males locked up, can't vote, can't own a firearm, might be Tulia, Jon Burge's victims in Chicago, maybe locked up by her federal prosecutor husband, Mr. Stewart. It's not dedicated to them. It's not meant for them. But her children, they get the dedication. That just like, man, I know lots of people dedicate books to their family or whatever, friends, whomever. But I mean, man, that real talk. I'm at least acknowledging the fact that Nicole, Jonathan, and Corinne got a white grandma who is referenced in the book. That was a part of what just, that did not seem correct to me. Let's see. But there's so much incorrect about this book, like whatever. And the first on the list for the acknowledgments, Nancy Rogers, the dean, former dean at Moritz College, that's saying this is a white woman. Like, and I think this is a signal to the white people that she's writing this book for. This is how you get to Martha's Vineyard. It does not start with black people who are suffering. It doesn't start with Angela Davis, who's been doing this work for decades. No. Nancy Rogers, she really shepherded my career and guided me along this path. And yeah. And then her husband, who's a prosecutor, who does not share her views about this and provided me a great career being a part of locking up black dudes. Let's see. She said that her sister is an African-American history scholar. That stood out to me as well. And I gave a side eye. So I said, is this another Dorothy Roberts and Isabel Wilkerson? All of the President Obama, Meghan Markle, all of the representatives for black people have a white parent. All of the experts on black people have a white parent or are married to a white person. Diane Watchell is a white woman with the New Press, who her editor and publisher, that stood out to me as well, who might have had a oversized influence in why this book sounds the way that it does, who it's marketed to, all of that. Let's see. She said, I inherited my determination from my mother, white woman, who astounds me with her ability to overcome extraordinary obstacles and meet every day with fresh obstacles. When she said, with her ability to overcome extraordinary obstacles, like being excommunicated from your racist church and your racist relatives. She'd have to give me an example of an extraordinary obstacle that a white woman has to overcome, other than being married to a negro. I was thinking the extraordinary obstacle is try being a black dude in Ashland, Oregon, with 3 mulatto children and a white wife. That's your extraordinary obstacle. And take what I just said. I suspect Dad knows something of it still. I wish he was still. Let me back up so I can get the whole thing. I wish Dad were still alive to see this book, though I suspect he knows something of it. This book is for you too, Dad. May you rest in peace. We gonna miss you, black brother. I wonder what age he passed away. Black male privilege. That's all them times getting pulled over. What you doing with that white woman? You being raped? You okay? He kidnapped you? You say, shut up. I asked you no questions. I was talking to the white woman. Shut up. That's his co-workers at IBM talking. Thank you. That was a good one. He thought, see. But I thought the dad was had many more obstacles than the white. Because she didn't tell us. I haven't heard no interview. Have you all heard that? You all didn't even know she had a white woman. I'm talking to the limp noodle team. But I would like to know that. What obstacles did her mom, overcome? Other than, But that's self-induced, nobody look in the mirror. Let's see. Oh, and the preface, she said, I have a specific audience in mind. This book is not for everyone. Who is it for? People who care deeply about racial justice, say racism, but who for any number of reasons do not yet appreciate the magnitude of the crisis faced by communities of color as a result of mass incarceration. Now, to me, it's so convoluted, it seems like you writing this for white people. But she immediately comes in, in other words, I'm writing this book for people like me, the person I was 10 years ago. Now, with that, I'm not talking about white people, but I remember, so, wait a minute, she got that white parents. You're writing it for white people. I got you. Okay. Let's see. She says what has changed since the collapse of Jim Crow has less to do with the basic structure of our society than with the language we use to justify it. In the era of colorblindness, it is no longer socially permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, exclusion, and social contempt, so we don't. Now again, 2026, President Trump. And in fact, forget all of that. They said the ICE people are out there, they explicitly looking for people who are not white. The judge said that. And then you can add President Trump in there and all the rest of it, but like, what? And Ashland, Oregon, like, what are you talking about? It's not, again, you coward. Michelle Alexander, you get in your car. Let's go to Oregon. Ashland. Let's meet there. 11 p.m. We're going to take a drive. 30 minutes. We just ride around. We'll listen to your lame audiobook. We'll just drive around. Now, they don't see, especially you got 2 Negroes. We got 3 black parents. I don't think your white mom is going to be enough to, what you doing? And we got 0.1% Negroes. Ain't supposed to be 2 of y'all here. What you doing? Who you robbing? Looting? Stealing? You casing the bank? What you doing? They don't see color in Ashland. Get out of here. Let's see. All this about affirmative action I said before, just, man, anyone, white, non-white, if you are discussing affirmative action, if it really is, I'm ignorant, and I really didn't know that white people benefit most from this program, go do more research, come back and present after you're better informed. I generally do not think that is the case for practically anyone. I think pretty much everyone, they know they are just not being truthful about all this. Let's see. When she makes all this about, she sees the sun and the drug wars, the new Jim Crow, and you sound like a crazy person, to me, it made her sound like the crazy person. Like there has been so much work for so many decades that she's ignoring. You sounding like this was new to you until about 10 years before you wrote this book. So that's like 2000, basically. A little bit after 2000, 9/11 times or so. That's when it started to click. Like, wow, they are really doing enough. Like, and you went to Stanford? You saw what happened to your black dad? It just reinforces, like, wow, that is exactly why I did not want to read this book. Exactly why I was shocked all the people acting like they had never heard a book about racism in prisons before, and that this was the best of them all. Shocked. I still, really, that's not even correct. I am repulsed. Let's see. Oh, man, I am repulsed. She says, occasionally in the course of my work, someone would make a remark suggesting that perhaps the war on drugs is a racist conspiracy to put blacks in their place. This type of remark was invariably accompanied by nervous laughter. Now, were these black people? Were these white people? What was the context? Martha's Vineyard? Intended to convey the impression that although the idea had crossed their minds, it was not an idea a reasonable person would take seriously. Most people assume the war on drugs was launched in response to the crisis caused by crack cocaine in the inner city neighborhoods. This view holds that racial disparities in drug convictions and sentences, as well as the rapid explosion of the prison population, reflect nothing more than the government's zealous but benign efforts to address rampant drug crime in poor minority neighborhoods. I do not think most people think this. I do not think most people thought this in 2010, and I know most people did not think this even, I just told you, Angela Davis had like over 3,000 people, late 90s, organizing about the prison industrial complex. That is, and I am sure there were a lot of people who wanted to attend who could not if you got over 3,000 people. And they didn't have no Facebook, they didn't have no social media, they didn't have no Uber. Oh my God. Lies. The lies. Oh my, and again, if you're offended, like, man, you calling us limp noodle. One, I'm not calling us limp noodle. I'm saying we are team limp noodle. I'm included. And man, Mr. Fuller says we are pitiful, primitive. Didn't Fuller say that? Yes or no? Did he say that? Yes or no? This is the shorthand. We are team limp noodle. Now, when she commenced to talking about the CIA and drugs, oh man, when you get people who don't read, now as soon as she hit all this, I said, oh, Gary Webb, Dark Alliance, that's got to be here, right? She's going to talk about all that. Gary Webb, got to be, and even pause for black politicians. Maxine Waters, the great, she was front and center talking about all of this. All of this. Prison reform, racism, like years before this goofy, cowardly, lying book was published. Back when Michelle Alexander, by her own testimony, was ignorant and thought, y'all crazy, talking about the CIA selling drugs. Y'all are loony. That was her testimony, right? Okay. Maxine Waters, one elected official, she was talking about this vehemently. They got a video. She can stand by her record proudly. What were you doing, Michelle Alexander? In Palo Alto with the white folk? William Shockley. Now, when she gets on all this, I'm looking, where is Gary Webb? White man, journalist, literally wrote the book about all it. Where is Gary Webb? I go to the footnotes when she says the CIA also admitted that in the midst of the war on drugs, it blocked law enforcement efforts to investigate illegal drug networks that were helping to fund its covert war in Nicaragua. Now, when I click the footnote 5, see Alexander Cockburn and Jeffrey St. Clair white out the CIA drugs and the Press. This is from 1999. See Nick Shao, The Truth in Dark Alliance, Los Angeles Times, August 18, 2006. Peter Kornblue, CIA's Challenge in South Central, Los Angeles Times. And then Why They Hated Gary Webb, The Nation, December 16, 2004. There is no direct citation to Mr. Webb's book, Dark Alliance. What did he have to say about this? You just got two casual references to him, not the strange way that he died, none of that. And it is immediately dismissed. All of this, it bears emphasis that the CIA never admitted, nor has any evidence been revealed to support the claim that it intentionally sought the destruction of the black community by allowing illegal drugs to be smuggled into the United States. Period. Now again, I'm saying this is cowardly. This is a book written for white people, and you're not even being honest. One, Gary Webb should have been in the body of the text. Don't just be cowardly and hide him in the footnote. She didn't even quote directly from the book. Go directly to the evidence. And real talk, let's just use logic. So if the most powerful white people say that there is a war on drugs, and then the same powerful white people are working to sell drugs and or obstruct you from prosecuting people who are selling drugs on their behalf, this is what you wanted to happen. I'm just following the logic. You could have stopped it if you didn't want it to happen. Yes, you lock up a lot of niggers. That's what this whole book is about. You could have stopped all of this. You didn't want to. You were aware of what was happening. I'm just following logic. Allow the readers could have followed their own logic. Present us with all the details. We could have made up our own mind. You can come out and add emphasis on some nonsense. You can be definitive there, but you got to be mealy-mouthed when talking about the system of white supremacy is colorblind and all this. Most Americans, we don't believe it. She can't even say most Americans don't believe in racism. That's what I mean. You can add emphasis that the CIA didn't mean deliberately destroy black people. But I'm mealy-mouthed. I don't have all that emphasis when I got it. Now, everybody didn't want to be about no racism. Come on, man. You're a coward. Let's see. And then she even comes back. Nonetheless, conspiracy theorists' name-calling surely must be forgiven for their bold accusation of genocide. What's all the name-calling? You're loony if you think back when you didn't understand it, allegedly, you were loony if you thought the prison setup was the new Jim Crow. You're loony. You're crazy, making all these wild, you're a conspiracy theorist. Let's see. She says, when she starts talking about the 1970s, she says that it was not preordained that we were going to have this massive population of prisoners, that in the 70s it was thought that prisons were going to go extinct. She says, this will be my last one, then we can get to audio too. She says that the growing consensus among experts was perhaps best reflected by the National Advisory Commission on Criminal Justice Standards and Goals, which issued a recommendation in 1973 that no new institutions for adults should be built and existing institutions for juveniles should be closed. This recommendation was based on their finding that the prison, the reformatory, and the jail have achieved only a shocking record of failure. There is overwhelming evidence that these institutions create crime rather than prevent it. That all, in my view, is a massive lie. Now, how can I add emphasis the same way that she did? This is a deliberate, willful lie. Now, why would I say that? You're supposed to be a legal scholar. She should know better than us. What did I keep saying? Attica. You had a prison riot in New York State. Revolt, really, was the response to, and they were talking about their inhumane prison reform, they messing us over, racism, was the response to Attica, hey, Prison is obsolete. We don't need no more of these. Absolutely not. And I can bookend the decade. Willie Bosket. Do you know that name? I do. We've talked about it before in the cows. Black, privileged, black male, South Carolina connect, came to New York, accused of committing all these crimes, really bad crimes, and killing folks and what have you. I said, tough on crime. Forget all that. We're not doing away with prisons. We're going to lock them up and try them as adults at 17. Change the laws. Now, does that sound like, hey, we done locking people up? And that set the tone. Willie Bosket case, that set the tone. Lock them up. 15, 16, lock them up. We talked about that case before. So are you telling me she didn't know about either of these cases? You're a liar and a coward. The last one I'll get in, she says the attention of civil rights has largely been devoted to other issues. That's the same one I said before about I thought she was really, who are you even talking about? And then being deceptive with not telling us about affirmative action benefiting white women, white people. I had lots more notes, but I will pause there so we can get back to it. Folks can be thinking themselves again about the significance of her having a white parent. And then you could just be on the lookout. Prison industrial complex. Have you heard that term before? Is it in this book? Katherine Massey Book Club, The New Jim Crow. Cowbell.
It is not possible to write a relatively short book that explores all aspects of the phenomenon of mass incarceration and its implications for racial justice. No attempt has been made to do so here. This book paints with a broad brush, and as a result, many important issues have not received the attention they deserve. For example, relatively little is said here about the unique experience of women, Latinos, and immigrants in the criminal justice system, though these groups are particularly vulnerable to the worst abuses and suffer in ways that are important and distinct. This book focuses on the experience of African American men in the new caste system. I hope other scholars and advocates will pick up where the book leaves off and develop the critique more fully or apply the themes sketched here to other groups and other contexts. What this book is intended to do, the only thing it is intended to do, is to stimulate a much-needed conversation about the role of the criminal justice system in creating and perpetuating racial hierarchy in the United States. The fate of millions of people, indeed the future of the black community itself, may depend on the willingness of those who care about racial justice to re-examine their basic assumptions about the role of the criminal justice system in our society. The fact that more than half of the young black men in any large American city are currently under the control of the criminal justice system, or saddled with criminal records, is not, as many argue, just a symptom of poverty or poor choices, but rather evidence of a new racial caste system at work. Chapter 1 begins our journey. It briefly reviews the history of racialized social control in the United States, answering the basic question, how did we get here? The chapter describes the control of African Americans through racial caste systems, such as slavery and Jim Crow, which appear to die but then are reborn in new form, tailored to the needs and constraints of the time. As we shall see, there is a certain pattern to the births and deaths of racial caste in America. Time and again, the most ardent proponents of racial hierarchy have succeeded in creating new caste systems by triggering a collapse of resistance across the political spectrum. This feat has been achieved largely by appealing to the racism and vulnerability of lower-class whites, a group of people who are understandably eager to ensure that they never find themselves trapped at the bottom of the American totem pole. This pattern, dating back to slavery, has birthed yet another racial caste system in the United States, mass incarceration. The structure of mass incarceration is described in some detail in Chapter 2, with a focus on the war on drugs. Few legal rules meaningfully constrain the police in the drug war, and enormous financial incentives have been granted to law enforcement to engage in mass drug arrests through military-style tactics. Once swept into the system, one's chances of ever being truly free are slim, often to the vanishing point. Defendants are typically denied meaningful legal representation, pressured by the threat of lengthy sentences into a plea bargain, and then placed under formal control, in prison or jail, on probation or parole. Upon release, ex-offenders are discriminated against, legally, for the rest of their lives, and most will eventually return to prison. They are members of America's new undercaste. Chapter 3 turns our attention to the role of race in the U.S. criminal justice system. It describes the method to the madness, how a formally race-neutral criminal justice system can manage to round up, arrest, and imprison an extraordinary number of black and brown men, when people of color are actually no more likely to be guilty of drug crimes and many other offenses than whites. This chapter debunks the notion that rates of black imprisonment can be explained by crime rates and identifies the huge racial disparities at every stage of the criminal justice process, from the initial stop, search, and arrest to the plea bargaining and sentencing phases. In short, the chapter explains how the legal rules that structure the system guarantee discriminatory results. These legal rules ensure that the undercaste is overwhelmingly black and brown. Chapter 4 considers how the caste system operates once people are released from prison. In many respects, release from prison does not represent the beginning of freedom but instead a cruel new phase of stigmatization and control. Myriad laws, rules, and regulations discriminate against ex-offenders and effectively prevent their meaningful reintegration into the mainstream economy and society. I argue that the shame and stigma of the prison label is, in many respects, more damaging to the African American community than the shame and stigma associated with Jim Crow. The criminalization and demonization of black men has turned the black community against itself, unraveling community and family relationships, decimating networks of mutual support, and intensifying the shame and self-hate experienced by the current pariah caste. The many parallels between mass incarceration and Jim Crow are explored in Chapter 5. The most obvious parallel is legalized discrimination. Like Jim Crow, mass incarceration marginalizes large segments of the African American community, segregates them physically, in prisons, jails, and ghettos, and then authorizes discrimination against them in voting, employment, housing, education, public benefits, and jury service. The federal court system has effectively immunized the current system from challenges on the grounds of racial bias, much as earlier systems of control were protected and endorsed by the U.S. Supreme Court. The parallels do not end there, however. Mass incarceration, like Jim Crow, helps to define the meaning and significance of race in America. Indeed, the stigma of criminality functions in much the same way that the stigma of race once did. It justifies a legal, social, and economic boundary between us and them. Chapter 5 also explores some of the differences among slavery, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration, most significantly the fact that mass incarceration is designed to warehouse a population deemed disposable, unnecessary to the functioning of the new global economy, while earlier systems of control were designed to exploit and control black labor. In addition, the chapter discusses the experience of white people in this new caste system. Although they have not been the primary targets of the drug war, they have been harmed by it, a powerful illustration of how a racial state can harm people of all colors. Finally, this chapter responds to skeptics who claim that mass incarceration cannot be understood as a racial caste system because many get tough on crime policies are supported by African Americans. Many of these claims, I note, are no more persuasive today than arguments made 100 years ago by blacks and whites who claimed that racial segregation simply reflected reality, not racial animus, and that African Americans would be better off not challenging the Jim Crow system but should focus instead on improving themselves within it. Throughout our history, there have been African Americans who, for a variety of reasons, have defended or been complicit with the prevailing system of control. Chapter 6 reflects on what acknowledging the presence of the new Jim Crow means for the future of civil rights advocacy. I argue that nothing short of a major social movement can successfully dismantle the new caste system. Meaningful reforms can be achieved without such a movement, but unless the public consensus supporting the current system is completely overturned, the basic structure of the new caste system will remain intact. Building a broad-based social movement, however, is not enough. It is not nearly enough to persuade mainstream voters that we have relied too heavily on incarceration or that drug abuse is a public health problem, not a crime. If the movement that emerges to challenge mass incarceration fails to confront squarely the critical role of race in the basic structure of our society, and if it fails to cultivate an ethic of genuine care, compassion, and concern for every human being, of every class, race, and nationality, within our nation's borders, including poor whites, who are often pitted against poor people of color. The collapse of mass incarceration will not mean the death of racial caste in America. Inevitably, a new system of racialized social control will emerge, one that we cannot foresee, just as the current system of mass incarceration was not predicted by anyone 30 years ago. No task is more urgent for racial justice advocates today than ensuring that America's current racial caste system is its last. 1. The rebirth of caste. The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again toward slavery. W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction in America. For more than 100 years, scholars have written about the illusory nature of the Emancipation Proclamation. President Abraham Lincoln issued a declaration purporting to free slaves held in Southern Confederate states, but not a single black slave was actually free to walk away from a master in those states as a result. A civil war had to be won first, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, and then, only then, were slaves across the South set free. Even that freedom proved illusory, though. As W.E.B. Du Bois eloquently reminds us, former slaves had a brief moment in the sun before they were returned to a status akin to slavery. Constitutional amendments guaranteeing African Americans equal protection of the laws and the right to vote proved as impotent as the Emancipation Proclamation once a white backlash against Reconstruction gained steam. Black people found themselves yet again powerless and relegated to convict leasing camps that were, in many ways, worse than slavery. Sunshine gave way to darkness, and the Jim Crow system of segregation emerged, a system that put black people nearly back where they began, in a subordinate racial caste. Few find it surprising that Jim Crow arose following the collapse of slavery. The development is described in history books as regrettable but predictable, given the virulent racism that gripped the South and the political dynamics of the time. What is remarkable is that hardly anyone seems to imagine that similar political dynamics may have produced another caste system in the years following the collapse of Jim Crow, one that exists today. The story that is told during Black History Month is one of triumph. The system of racial caste is officially dead and buried. Suggestions to the contrary are frequently met with shocked disbelief. The standard reply is, how can you say that a racial caste system exists today? Just look at Barack Obama. Just look at Oprah Winfrey. The fact that some African Americans have experienced great success in recent years does not mean that something akin to a racial caste system no longer exists. No caste system in the United States has ever governed all black people. There have always been free blacks and black success stories, even during slavery and Jim Crow. The superlative nature of individual black achievement today in formerly white domains is a good indicator that Jim Crow is dead, but it does not necessarily mean the end of racial caste. If history is any guide, it may have simply taken a different form. Any candid observer of American racial history must acknowledge that racism is highly adaptable. The rules and reasons the political system employs to enforce status relations of any kind, including racial hierarchy, evolve and change as they are challenged. The valiant efforts to abolish slavery and Jim Crow and to achieve greater racial equality have brought about significant changes in the legal framework of American society, new rules of the game, so to speak. These new rules have been justified by new rhetoric, new language, and a new social consensus, while producing many of the same results. This dynamic, which legal scholar Reva Siegel has dubbed preservation through transformation, is the process through which white privilege is maintained, though the rules and rhetoric change. This process, though difficult to recognize at any given moment, is easier to see in retrospect. Since the nation's founding, African Americans repeatedly have been controlled through institutions such as slavery and Jim Crow, which appear to die, but then are reborn in new form, tailored to the needs and constraints of the time. As described in the pages that follow, there is a certain pattern to this cycle. Following the collapse of each system of control, there has been a period of confusion, transition, in which those who are most committed to racial hierarchy search for new means to achieve their goals within the rules of the game as currently defined. It is during this period of uncertainty that the backlash intensifies and a new form of racialized social control begins to take hold. The adoption of the new system of control is never inevitable, but to date it has never been avoided. The most ardent proponents of racial hierarchy have consistently succeeded in implementing new racial caste systems by triggering a collapse of resistance across the political spectrum. This feat has been achieved largely by appealing to the racism and vulnerability of lower-class whites, a group of people who are understandably eager to ensure that they never find themselves trapped at the bottom of the American hierarchy. The emergence of each new system of control may seem sudden, but history shows that the seeds are planted long before each new institution begins to grow. For example, although it is common to think of the Jim Crow regime following immediately on the heels of Reconstruction, the truth is more complicated, and while it is generally believed that the backlash against the civil rights movement is defined primarily by the rollback of affirmative action and the undermining of federal civil rights legislation by a hostile judiciary, the seeds of the new system of control, mass incarceration, were planted during the civil rights movement itself, when it became clear that the old caste system was crumbling and a new one would have to take its place. With each reincarnation of racial caste, the new system, as sociologist Loic Wacquant puts it, is less total, less capable of encompassing and controlling the entire race. However, any notion that this evolution reflects some kind of linear progress would be misguided, for it is not at all obvious that it would be better to be incarcerated for life for a minor drug offense than to live with one's family, earning an honest living under the Jim Crow regime, notwithstanding the ever-present threat of the Klan. Moreover, as the systems of control have evolved, they have become perfected, arguably more resilient to challenge, and thus capable of enduring for generations to come. The story of the political and economic underpinnings of the nation's founding sheds some light on these recurring themes in our history and the reasons new racial caste systems continue to be born. The birth of slavery. Back there, before Jim Crow, before the invention of the Negro or the white man or the words and concepts to describe them, the colonial population consisted largely of a great mass of white and black bondsmen, who occupied roughly the same economic category and were treated with equal contempt by the lords of the plantations and legislatures. Curiously unconcerned about their color, these people worked together and relaxed together. Lerone Bennett Jr. The concept of race is a relatively recent development. Only in the past few centuries, owing largely to European imperialism, have the world's people been classified along racial lines. Here, in America, the idea of race emerged as a means of reconciling chattel slavery, as well as the extermination of American Indians, with the ideals of freedom preached by whites in the new colonies. In the early colonial period, when settlements remained relatively small, indentured servitude was the dominant means of securing cheap labor. Under this system, whites and blacks struggled to survive against a common enemy, what historian Lerone Bennett Jr. describes as the big planter apparatus and a social system that legalized terror against black and white bondsmen. Initially, blacks brought to this country were not all enslaved, many were treated as indentured servants. As plantation farming expanded, particularly tobacco and cotton farming, demand increased greatly for both labor and land. The demand for land was met by invading and conquering larger and larger swaths of territory. American Indians became a growing impediment to white European progress, and during this period, the images of American Indians promoted in books, newspapers, and magazines became increasingly negative. As sociologists Keith Kilty and Eric Swank have observed, eliminating savages is less of a moral problem than eliminating human beings, and therefore American Indians came to be understood as a lesser race, uncivilized savages, thus providing a justification for the extermination of the native peoples. The growing demand for labor on plantations was met through slavery. American Indians were considered unsuitable as slaves, largely because native tribes were clearly in a position to fight back. The fear of raids by Indian tribes led plantation owners to grasp for an alternative source of free labor. European immigrants were also deemed poor candidates for slavery, not because of their race, but rather because they were in short supply and enslavement would, quite naturally, interfere with voluntary immigration to the new colonies. Plantation owners thus viewed Africans, who were relatively powerless, as the ideal slaves. The systematic enslavement of Africans, and the rearing of their children under bondage, emerged with all deliberate speed, quickened by events such as Bacon's Rebellion. Nathaniel Bacon was a white property owner in Jamestown, Virginia, who managed to unite slaves, indentured servants, and poor whites in a revolutionary effort to overthrow the planter elite. Although slaves clearly occupied the lowest position in the social hierarchy and suffered the most under the plantation system, the condition of indentured whites was barely better, and the majority of free whites lived in extreme poverty. As explained by historian Edmund Morgan, in colonies like Virginia, the planter elite, with huge land grants, occupied a vastly superior position to workers of all colors. Southern colonies did not hesitate to invent ways to extend the terms of servitude, and the planter class accumulated uncultivated lands to restrict the options of free workers. The simmering resentment against the planter class created conditions that were ripe for revolt. Varying accounts of Bacon's rebellion abound, but the basic facts are these. Bacon developed plans in 1675 to seize Native American lands in order to acquire more property for himself and others and nullify the threat of Indian raids. When the planter elite in Virginia refused to provide militia support for his scheme, Bacon retaliated, leading an attack on the elite, their homes, and their property. He openly condemned the rich for their oppression of the poor and inspired an alliance of white and black bond laborers, as well as slaves, who demanded an end to their servitude. The attempted revolution was ended by force and false promises of amnesty. A number of the people who participated in the revolt were hanged. The events in Jamestown were alarming to the planter elite, who were deeply fearful of a multiracial alliance of bond workers and slaves. Word of Bacon's rebellion spread far and wide, and several more uprisings of a similar type followed. In an effort to protect their superior status and economic position, the planters shifted their strategy for maintaining dominance. They abandoned their heavy reliance on indentured servants in favor of the importation of more black slaves. Instead of importing English-speaking slaves from the West Indies, who were more likely to be familiar with European language and culture, many more slaves were shipped directly from Africa. These slaves would be far easier to control and far less likely to form alliances with poor whites. Fearful that such measures might not be sufficient to protect their interests, the planter class took an additional precautionary step, a step that would later come to be known as a racial bribe. Deliberately and strategically, the planter class extended special privileges to poor whites in an effort to drive a wedge between them and black slaves. White settlers were allowed greater access to Native American lands, white servants were allowed to police slaves through slave patrols and militias, and barriers were created so that free labor would not be placed in competition with slave labor. These measures effectively eliminated the risk of future alliances between black slaves and poor whites. Poor whites suddenly had a direct, personal stake in the existence of a race-based system of slavery. Their own plight had not improved by much, but at least they were not slaves. Once the planter elite split the labor force, poor whites responded to the logic of their situation and sought ways to expand their racially privileged position. By the mid-1770s, the system of bond labor had been thoroughly transformed into a racial caste system predicated on slavery. The degraded status of Africans was justified on the ground that Negroes, like the Indians, were an uncivilized lesser race, perhaps even more lacking in intelligence and laudable human qualities than the red-skinned natives. The notion of white supremacy rationalized the enslavement of Africans, even as whites endeavored to form a new nation based on the ideals of equality, liberty, and justice for all. Before democracy, chattel slavery in America was born. It may be impossible to overstate the significance of race in defining the basic structure of American society. The structure and content of the original Constitution was based largely on the effort to preserve a racial caste system, slavery, while at the same time affording political and economic rights to whites, especially propertied whites. The southern slaveholding colonies would agree to form a union only on the condition that the federal government would not be able to interfere with the right to own slaves. Northern white elites were sympathetic to the demand for their property rights to be respected, as they, too, wanted the Constitution to protect their property interests. As James Madison put it, the nation ought to be constituted to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. Consequently, the Constitution was designed so the federal government would be weak, not only in its relationship to private property, but also in relationship to the rights of states to conduct their own affairs. The language of the Constitution itself was deliberately colorblind. The words slave or negro were never used, but the document was built upon a compromise regarding the prevailing racial caste system. Federalism, the division of power between the states and the federal government, was the device employed to protect the institution of slavery and the political power of slaveholding states. Even the method for determining proportional representation in Congress and identifying the winner of a presidential election, the Electoral College, were specifically developed with the interest of slaveholders in mind. Under the terms of our country's founding document, slaves were defined as 3/5 of a man, not a real, whole human being. Upon this racist fiction rests the entire structure of American democracy.
It's painful. It's painful. She has the audacity to talk about a racist fiction. Indeed. Indeed. If all this is racist fiction, well, then you don't have an American democracy, a point Dr. Frances Cress Welsing emphasized frequently. We do not have a democracy. We have a system of white supremacy. I think our listener who wrote in, he said, man, it's kind of dangerous. Folks who are reading this book, I agree. For many reasons, I agree. Katherine Massey Book Club. The number 720-716-7300. The code 564-943#. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see, I'll get in email number 2 and then some of my thoughts before we wrap up. I think you even have to finish email 1. Email number 2. Hi, Gus and C.O.W.S audience. For many years, I was confused as to why racism in America was referred to as Jim Crow. Me too. And why that name is applied to a whole system designed to subjugate the lives of non-white people. According to Copilot, the name Jim Crow came from a minstrel character in a 19th century stage routine. Oh, not that part. I've seen that. Called Jump Jim Crow. They got that on YouTube, which mocked black people and reinforced harmful stereotypes. The term later became shorthand for the entire segregation system. Now, beyond that, I've said we should not be using that term. It's not logical. It's vague. It's not scientific. Lots of others. Why would we even continue to use that term? Yeah. I can see the attraction of using the term in the title, but I think that's the first place where the book is weak because it downplays the seriousness of the system of white supremacy and the harm caused to non-white people. It also gives the impression that racism ended rather than morphed or was refined. 2, I'm also struggling with the focus on black men that have been incarcerated not having the right to vote. I understand being incarcerated restricts a person's ability to function day to date compared with those who have not been in prison. True. However, having the right to vote does not reduce the likelihood of experiencing racism or going to prison. True. Perhaps I'm missing something, so interested in the views of others. I guess some might say, well, at least you could have voted for someone other than Obama, or at least on a local level, they might say, you could participate, maybe pick a different sheriff. They have statute, school board, superintendent, that sort of thing. No, that doesn't end racism. No, that probably will not, at least your day-to-day lived experience as a victim of racism probably won't change it that much substantially, but you try to do the small things that you can within the confines. But that is a significant point that at least the early focus, what we've heard thus far, it does seem to center around voting, their loss of being able to vote. That does seem to be a critical focus of all of this, for sure. And I mean, it was written in the era of Obama, so maybe 2010, maybe that would be a little bit more of the focus, like voting, see what we did, yes we can, type of a euphoria. That's how she started the book too. 3, I think the government, through the war on drugs, has achieved the outcome it wanted. That's most folks would say, yeah, especially if you have the ability to stop this and you don't. This is what you wanted to happen. 4, I'm also struggling with the use of the term a new caste to describe black men that are in or have been incarcerated. I also wondered what people in India think about the use of the word caste. I don't know. I know they do write books about racism, and they do say all that. I don't like in terms of, do they think what we have here is the same thing? Like case, like, oh yeah, that's a case. I don't know. Maybe they see the black people over there and go, oh yeah, get back. Maybe because they mistreat the dark people when they come over there. So I would be curious to hear if any of those folks agree, if they think yes, this is the same thing, or it's all global system of white supremacy. Who knows? I asked Copilot for assistance. The word caste carries 2 distinct meanings depending on where it is used. In India, caste refers to an ancient, hereditary, religiously rooted hierarchy that governs marriage, kinship, ritual purity, and everyday social life. In the United States, scholars who use the term are speaking metaphorically. They use caste to describe a rigid racial hierarchy, especially the long-term exclusion faced by black men affected by mass incarceration. The U.S. usage focuses on structural immobility, stigma, and group-based disadvantage, not on hereditary or religious status. Indian scholars are divided on whether this comparison is appropriate. Many Dalit and anti-caste thinkers support the analogy, arguing that caste is a global structure of graded inequality and that the U.S. racial order shares the key features such as stigma, restricted mobility, and state-sanctioned exclusion. Others accept the comparison only cautiously, warning that it risks flattening the deep historical, religious, and cultural roots of Indian caste. A smaller group rejects the comparison outright, arguing that caste is uniquely Indian and that using the term elsewhere dilutes the specificity of Dalit oppression. Overall, the comparison is seen as useful but imperfect. It highlights the severity and permanence of racialized exclusion in the U.S., but it must be used with care to avoid erasing the distinct histories and lived realities of caste in South Asia. I asked where we should focus. Copilot said, if your goal is accuracy and explanation, focus on the problem, structural racism in the criminal justice system. If your goal is impact and describing lived reality, focus on the effect, a caste-like social position created by incarceration. On impact. On the problem, structural racism in the... Accuracy and explanation, focus on the problem. Yeah, that's probably where it would be. That's structural racism. That's where it would be. That's where it would be. Let's see what the book is. Does it do more of the impact, or does it do more of the structural racism component, or does it do both? We'll have to kind of pay attention as we're moving along through the text here. In my view, it's probably going to fail on both accounts because it is not accurate, so we'll have to see. Make sure I didn't miss anything from email number 1. Much obliged. All the emails untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. Did I get that one? Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, appealing to the racism and vulnerability of lower class whites. Chapter 5, the chapter discusses the experience of white people in this new caste system. Although they have not been the primary targets of the drug war, they have been harmed by it. I suspect the author is going to put in a lot of effort to decentralize the primary role of people classified as white as perpetrators of these crimes and positioning white people as victims. We shall see. It would not surprise me, even when she chooses to use the term white and when the phrasing becomes more vague. Isabel Wilkerson did some of the same things in her text. We'll have to be mindful about that. She says, the rebirth of caste. 1. For more than 100 years, scholars have written about the illusory nature of the Emancipation Proclamation. President Abraham Lincoln issued a declaration purporting to free slaves held in Southern Confederate states, but not a single black slave was actually free. to walk away from a master in those states. As a result, the immediate impact of the proclamation is that it provided the legal framework for the recruitment of black soldiers from the formerly enslaved, those who were freed as the Union Army took control of the South, estimated to be 200,000 by war's end, who played a major role in the war. While her statement is somewhat true, I think it leaves out important details and context. That is true. That I think often gets minimized. The runaway, and I think this was calculated, if people want to give Abraham Lincoln, suspected race soldier, any credit, that was a calculated part of the proclamation to encourage so-called runaway slaves, and then they could join the army and help free. And they're losing their property, the Southern racists. So that was all calculated, if you want to give any credit there. 2. Black people found themselves yet again powerless and relegated to convict leasing camps that were in many ways worse than slavery. Sunshine gave way to darkness, and the Jim Crow system of segregation emerged. Interesting. Worse than slavery. Here come the metaphors, for sure. 3. The superlative nature of individual black achievement today in formerly white domains is a good indicator that Jim Crow is dead, but it does not necessarily mean the end of racial caste. Racial showcasing is not evidence of progress. Facts. Hey, you had James Meredith at Ole Miss over 60 years ago. So, I mean, what does that prove? What does that prove? And I think he did well there. You've had lots of examples of that. George Washington Carver, I think, was singular. Way back, way back. Was singular in many environments. That does not, come on, man. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing. To even, that's what I mean. For someone to even make a statement like that, because you got to go to, wait a minute now, see, this is where I got to remember. See, this is Michelle Alexander, who grew up high school formative years in Ashland, Oregon, with 0.1% black people. Oh, I see. So for you in Clanville, it might be, hey, Jim Crow dead, hey, Clan would have came in here and tarred and feathered me about last week. Might still, if we go there 11 p.m. That's open invitation, because I'm right up the road from Ashland. I've been to Oregon number of times. You want to meet up, Michelle Alexander, let her know we meet up in Ashland. We go cruising. 11 p.m. We listen to her lame book. I'll be quiet the whole time. I won't sit there and call you no names. We sit there, you coward, you mulatto coward, you. I won't do none of that. I'll keep my mouth closed and we'll just ride. And we'll see. Are they colorblind? Have they made progress in Ashland, Oregon? 4, in which those who are most committed to racial hierarchy search for new means to achieve their goals within the rules of the game as currently defined. There are no rules when it concerns non-white people, and this is not a game. I'm so glad he said that. They have that in the archives. Dr. Welsing, she was being interviewed by a victim, and this victim asked her, Dr. Welsing, what the white people, similar type of phrasing, white people, they dominate and control the rules of the game. He said it is not a game. It is a power dynamic and global system to control, dominate, and take the lives of non-white people. Game. It's not a game. Even all of that, really, she says, in which those who are most committed to racial hierarchy. What? The most powerful white people? The most powerful race of that old. This is what I got from Casey, and this is what I said. Like, I don't read books on racism. This is my first time sitting down with a book, and I'm gonna get serious about racism. And this is what you give me: those who are most committed to racial hierarchy. What are you talking about? You coward! You talking about your mom? You talking about your granddad? Coward! I won't do that if we ride through Ashland, though. I'll be quiet. The emergence of each new system of control may seem sudden, but history shows that the seeds are planted long before each new institution begins to grow. Got cucumbers? What's going on here? For example, although it is common to think of the Jim Crow regime following immediately on the heels of Reconstruction, the truth is more complicated. With each reincarnation of racial caste, the new system, this passage is very confusing. Mr. Fuller's description of the stages of the global system of racism, white supremacy, makes more sense to me. Stages: initiation, maintenance, expansion, refinement. Did he change it from establishment? Either one. And a continual recapitulation of the prior. Exactly. Dr. Welsing talked about that too. They just continue to do the same thing, go right back, start it all over again. That is not progress, by the way, not being confused. But that's why I said, like, I don't think she's going to, if this book is about the structure of what produces all these black dudes in prison or the impact, I don't think it's going to do an adequate job of either, because it's not accurate. Here, I mean, I don't really have to even say anything else. It's not. That's why it's number 4, and it could move higher. That's why it's repulsive. Why I have to sit here and be forced to, and then to get all these people to co-sign. All of these people around the world, this book, and not everybody. Like I said, there were people who were critical of this book. I'll share some of the, other than myself, there were people who were critical of this book, and for some of the same reasons. But man, that was few and far between. They have white people and Jesse Jackson. And all that. This is great. Woo! Again, I cannot say enough. Michelle Alexander. Yes, I'm saying, because she looks like Alicia Keys. She looks like Meghan Markle. She looks like Thandie Newton. OBZ. Non-white person, one white parent. Dorothy Roberts. I'm saying, yes, that does has an impact. Even an impact. Do you get invited to Martha's Vineyard? Plenty of black people have written books about prison. Plenty. They don't get invited to Martha's sold out appearance at Martha's Vineyard on their first book. Cowbell. However, any notion that this evolution reflects some kind of linear progress would be misguided, for it is not at all obvious that it would be better to be incarcerated for life for a minor drug offense than to live with one's family earning an honest living under the Jim Crow regime, notwithstanding the ever-present threat of the Klan. I'm going to need some help on what the author means here. I don't know what she's talking. That's why I said, when you're not writing accurately and you're lying, in my view, you're lying deliberately, it's going to be impossible to have an accurate book and even to make sense, to be logical. Accuracy and logic tend to be parallel, similar path, taking you to the same spot. This is neither. So I have no idea. Neither one of those sounds like a quality life to me. I'm a black dude, and I got some cannabis charge or what have you. I got a charge for life. They hang a felony on me. I get all these years, 3 strikes or whatever it is. Can't see my children and all the rest of it. Can't get housing and all that good stuff. Probation officer, okay. Or I live with my family earning whatever, and she's under Jim Crow. So do you mean like right now? 2026? Do you mean like 1926? I'm not really sure. So you put me back there, and the Klan could get us any time. Khalif Browder, Emmett Till. Khalif Browder, Emmett Till. Replace white supremacy with justice. Let's see. Much obliged for our emails. Make sure that Missy folks have comments they want to get in before we conclude. Let me know. It will be fast, or at least I will be interesting. The people that read this, if it's, wow, I read this, and because that has happened to me, where sometimes I've read a book the first time and I thought it was great, and then as I got a better understanding of racism, still learning, I thought way different about it. Black Love is a Revolutionary Act. Also, worst book. And that book is also not accurate, man. We don't need no more inaccuracies. Like, especially if you're going to write a book, it would be totally different if somebody just stopped you when you were just getting out of the shower and asked you some really in-depth question, caught you off guard, and you're still soaking wet, Or if someone caught you first thing when you're waking up in the morning, they came and asked you some really scholarly, in-depth question, and I didn't even get my yawn in yet, or nothing. You write a book. You have a lot of time to research and prepare, study, proofread, all of it. It's no excuse to have a whole lot of nonsense. And like I said, where it's deliberately dishonest. Freak all throughout the book. The title isn't even honest, man. All of it. Jim Crow, colorblind, all of it. And that's the book that we get to start with, to, wow, my opening to understanding racism. Awful. Let's see, what will I get in quickly before we get to it? I would just say her tacky retelling of Bacon's Rebellion. You can go back in the archives. We did talk about the Tulia, Texas racism. We also talked about Bacon's Rebellion many times. Jacqueline Battlelore, who is an admitted white supremacist. She was at White Privilege Conference 10. She's been a guest on the Cows repeatedly. She talks about that incident, Bacon's Rebellion, and saying that there's so much evidence of an entrenched system of white supremacy racism well in advance of Bacon's Rebellion. The general telling is, oh my goodness, the really powerful race soldiers, we don't want the low-life, poor white people uniting with the negros, so we got to put some laws in and change things around. You already had lots of that in place well in advance of Bacon's Rebellion. Jacqueline Battlelore specifically, she talks about the prohibition of sexual intercourse between white people and black people, even at that time. For white women in particular, you can't be messing around with no Leroys. Hey, Michelle Alexander mom. They already had those rules, laws in place, and then prohibition of black people from owning firearms. So you already had lots of laws entrenched. As she said, black people didn't have the same standing as white people. That was well entrenched, well before we got to Bacon's Rebellion. It was not, no, we got to get out of here. And that was something I pointed out with Jacqueline Battlelore, too. The firearms is mandated. Black dudes specifically, don't you get no firearm to Leroy, and don't you get no white woman either. Let's see. And she says it twice really quick, where it can't just be white people. She says those most committed to racial hierarchy search for new means, and then the most ardent proponents of racial hierarchy, white people? Oh, that'll upset the people at Martha's Vineyard. You can't get, okay. Or your mom? Let's see. I don't know who she's talking about in terms of the black people that have achieved all this so-called success. Do you mean people like you? You have a white parent, so, okay. Obama, he has a white parent, okay. And these people are still victims of racism. So what have they achieved? Skip Lewis Gates, he's married to a white person. He got shackled at his own porch. He did get to go to Martha's Vineyard, so I guess he came out okay, right? Let's see. She said the only thing this book is intended to do is stimulate a much-needed conversation about the role of the criminal justice system in creating and perpetuating racial hierarchy in the United States. Many people had already talked about that, and if that's all this book is designed to do, and you don't even talk accurately about it yourself, throw this in the trash. And especially, you said this book is geared to white people. Is it supposed to get white people to talk to black people honestly about racism? Because you don't even do that in the book. Trash Man, number 4, worst book of all time. Number 4 might move higher, right next to Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, where it should be. She said we also avoid talking about race. I don't know who she's talking about here. Is she talking about white people? Is she talking about non-white people? The time that she wrote this book, nobody was avoiding talking about race with Obama in the White House. Like, nobody. Now, whether it was we are not post-racial and all that, and the Tea Party people and the birth of Donald Trump, but it was not. Ain't nobody talking about race. Now, what are you talking about? They said the Klan websites were overrun. What are you talking about? We don't talk about class. I would say that's a lie, too. We can't talk about racism because everybody wants to talk about class and class this and I'm Marxist-Leninist and it's class problem and all that old nonsense. And all this class, even when all that continues about class and lower class and higher class and all of that is confusion and a lie. The class is white people. Dr. Welsing said that decades ago. I've said that for years myself. That is the class in the system of white supremacy racism. You can be Negro with a lot of money. White people can take it quicker than I can show you. Lots of evidence of that. I suspect reason why her dad and them got all them evictions working at IBM. Anything else? The colorblind public consensus that prevails in America today, i.e. widespread belief that race no longer matters, has blinded us to the realities of race in our society and facilitated the emergence of a new caste system. Again, what malarkey. We keeps popping up, and us, all of that. Who are you talking about? What are you talking about? We do not have no colorblind consensus, certainly not then. And there's certainly not then nor now is there any sort of widespread belief that race no longer matters. Like, I have no, and blinded us to the realities. Who are you talking about? Why do we have to bring this up every time with books? Who are you talking, unless you're talking about Ray Charles, you'd have to put it on someone specific. Okay. Yes, he has it. Oh, Stevie Wonder. Yes. Okay. If you're just talking about the population in general, no, man, we do not have no widespread vision impairment. This is not the result of white people not being able to see. Negroes are not invisible. Like, cut all that out. And he had said about the metaphors, she's stacking them up. Case did as well. It's not, when you're not really interested in speaking accurately about racism, metaphors are your friend. Let justice roll down. A quiet stream. Our children will hang out together at the breakfast table of justice. The bacon sandwich of integration. I mean, you can clown if you just, metaphors. You can really do it up. We don't need all that nonsense. We need accuracy, man. Strive for accuracy. Strive for logic. With that, I'm going to get me a bacon sandwich of justice, and we will be here for the Counter-Racist Weekly Review tomorrow, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And then I'll update the upcoming broadcasts for the week, FBI files, all of that good stuff. We'll do it up for mañana, Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And we'll be back next week, same time as we continue through. Still just getting started, really. Michelle Alexander's the new Jim Crow. Sobriety would be best. I guess if we're going to read this old lame book, like, yes, we can have high-functioning brain computers that are working at maximum capacity, weave through all of this nonsense, and then she is talking about all the black people that get locked up on all these substances. So, sobriety for the victims of racism, white supremacy. Creator, we ask that you remind us, stop saying not all white people are racist. But my white granddad, he voted for Jesse Jackson. Incidentally, Jesse Jackson didn't even win the primary in 84 or 88, so white granddad probably voted for Reagan in 88, Reagan in 84, Bush in 88 voted for Jesse Jackson. We miss you, Brother Jesse Jackson, even though I do not agree with your review of New Jim Crow. I will hope secretly that you did not read the book and were just trying to do a solid for a non-white person with one black parent. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cows signing out. Thanks all for tuning in. 11 p.m. in Ashland, Michelle. Anytime. Anytime.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.